Hello, good morning, Jamal.
Can you hear me okay?
Yeah, I can hear you just fine. Can you hear me?
Excellent.
Great. So
Yeah.
the clips I got from you is 3 clips: PRO Act on 15 minimum wage, and then Biden wants to remove 100% of lead, and Tim Scott, America is
Yeah.
not racist.
America is not racist, even though they call me racist, even though they say racist stuff to me. Yeah. Those are the three. Those are going to come up in the conversations with the
Two
different
guests.
guests. Yeah. And so I'll announce them, but it should be in the order that I gave.
Okay, cool. So I just duplicated it twice, pretty much in the same order.
Yeah. And worst come to worst, if it changes, I'll give you time.
Heads up. Yeah.
I'll announce
I
it.
got you. Cool.
All right. Let's kick some ass.
One minute.
You're listening to Radio Sputnik, telling the untold.
Fault lines.
Live from across the divided states of America, it is time now for another edition, a special edition of the most disruptive show, covering news, events, politics, speeches, and more from across these disunited states and the surface of our increasingly divided globe. In the independent corner, I am your political analyst, Shane Stranahan.
And in the left corner, I am the indefatigable, a burning ember in the darkness, your political analyst, Jamarl Thomas.
And together we are Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. All right, folks, hope everybody's having a good morning. As we did 8 days ago, we aired Putin's State of the Nation address in full. We're going to be airing this morning Biden's sort of faux State of the Union address in full. You know, it looked like a State of the Union. He's addressing both halls of Congress. Everybody's sitting behind him. Everybody's sitting in front of him. It's a thing, but nevertheless, it's not actually a State of the Nation. I mean, a State of the Union for some reason or another. Anyway, we're going to be airing this thing in full. We're going to be coming back on later on with guests and with a batch of headlines at 9 a.m. But mostly we're going to be talking about his address last night. Without further ado, let's get into it. This is Biden's faux State of the Union last night.
Mitch and Chuck will understand it's good to be almost home. Down the hall. Anyway, thank you all. Madam Speaker, Madam Vice President. No president has ever said those words from this podium. No president has ever said those words. And it's about time. First Lady, I'm her husband. Second Gentleman, Chief Justice, members of the United States Congress and the Cabinet, distinguished guests, my fellow Americans, while the setting tonight is familiar, this gathering is just a little bit different. A reminder of the extraordinary times we're in. Throughout our history, presidents have come to this chamber to speak to Congress, to the nation, and to the world, to declare war, to celebrate peace, to announce new plans and possibilities. Tonight, I come to talk about crisis and opportunity, about rebuilding the nation, revitalizing our democracy, and winning the future for America. I stand here tonight, one day shy of the 100th day of my administration. 100 days since I took the oath of office and lifted my hand off our family Bible and inherited a nation, we all did, that was in crisis. The worst pandemic in a century, the worst economic crisis since the Great Depression, the worst attack on our democracy since the Civil War. Now, after just 100 days, I can report to the nation, America is on the move again. Turning peril into possibility, crisis to opportunity, setbacks into strength. We all know life can knock us down, but in America, we never, ever, ever stay down. Americans always get up. Today, that's what we're doing. America's rising anew, choosing hope over fear, truth over lies, and light over darkness. After 100 days of rescue and renewal, America is ready for a takeoff, in my view. We're working again, dreaming again, discovering again, and leading the world again. We have shown each other and the world that there's no quit in America, none. 100 days ago, America's house was on fire. We had to act. And thanks to the extraordinary leadership of Speaker Pelosi, Majority Leader Schumer, and the overwhelming support of the American people, Democrats, Independents, and Republicans, we did act. Together, we passed the American Rescue Plan, one of the most consequential rescue packages in American history. We're already seeing the results. We're already seeing the results. After I promised we'd get 100 million COVID-19 vaccine shots into people's arms in 100 days, we will have provided over 220 million COVID shots in those 100 days. Thanks to all the help of all of you. We're marshaling, with your help, everyone's help, we're marshaling every federal resource. We've gotten vaccines to nearly 40,000 pharmacies and over 700 community health centers where the poorest of the poor can be reached. We're setting up community vaccination sites, developing mobile units to get to hard-to-reach communities. Today, 90% of Americans now live within 5 miles of a vaccination site. Everyone over the age of 16, everyone is now eligible to get vaccinated right now, right away. Go get vaccinated, America. Go and get the vaccination. They're available. You're eligible now. When I was sworn in on January 20th, less than 1% of the seniors in America were fully vaccinated against COVID-19. 100 days later, 70% of seniors in America over 65 are protected, fully protected. Senior deaths from COVID-19 are down 80% since January, down 80% because of all of you. And more than half of all the adults in America have gotten at least one shot. A mass vaccination center in Glendale, Arizona, I asked the nurse, I said, "What's it like?" She looked at me and she said, "It's like every shot is giving a dose of hope," was her phrase, a dose of hope. A dose of hope for an educator in Florida who has a child suffering from an autoimmune disease. Wrote to me, said she's worried, and she was worried about bringing the virus home. She said she then got vaccinated at a large site in her car. She said she sat in her car when she got vaccinated and just cried out of joy and cried out of relief. Parents, seeing the smiles on their kids' faces for those who are able to go back to school because the teachers and school bus drivers and cafeteria workers have been vaccinated. Grandparents, hugging their children and grandchildren instead of pressing hands against a window to say goodbye. It means everything. Those things mean everything. You know, there's still, you all know it, you know it better than any group of Americans, there's still more work to do to beat this virus. We can't let our guard down. But tonight, I can say, because of you, the American people, our progress these past 100 days against one of the worst pandemics in history has been one of the greatest logistical achievements this country's ever seen. What else have we done in those first 100 days? We kept our commitment, Democrats and Republicans, of sending $1,400 rescue checks to 85% of American households. We've already sent more than 160 million checks out the door. It's making a difference. You all know it when you go home. For many people, it's making all the difference in the world. A single mom in Texas who wrote me, she said she couldn't work, but she said the relief check put food on the table and saved her and her son from eviction from their apartment. A grandmother in Virginia who told me she immediately took her granddaughter to the eye doctor, something she said she put off for months because she didn't have the money. One of the defining images, at least from my perspective in this crisis, has been cars lined up for miles. And not people just barely able to start those cars, nice cars, lined up for miles, waiting for a box of food to be put in their trunk. I don't know about you, but I didn't ever think I'd see that in America. And all of this is through no fault of their own. No fault of their own, these people are in this position. That's why the rescue plan is delivering food and nutrition assistance to millions of Americans facing hunger. And hunger is down sharply already. We're also providing rental assistance. You all know this, but the American people, I want to make sure they understand. Keeping people from being evicted from their homes. Providing loans to small businesses that reopen and keep their employees on the job. During these 100 days, an additional 800,000 Americans enrolled in the Affordable Care Act when I established a special sign-up period to do that. 800,000 in that period. We're making one of the largest one-time ever investments, ever, in improving health care for veterans. Critical investments to address the opioid crisis. And maybe most importantly, thanks to the American Rescue Plan, we're on track to cut child poverty in America in half this year. And in the process, while this was all going on, the economy created more than 1,300,000 new jobs in 100 days. More jobs in the first 100 days than any president on record. The International Monetary Fund is now estimating our economy will grow at a rate of more than 6% this year. That will be the fastest pace of economic growth in this country in nearly 4 decades. America's moving forward, but we can't stop now. We're in competition with China and other countries to win the 21st century. We're at a great inflection point in history. We have to do more than just build back better. We have to build back better. We have to compete more strenuously than we have. Throughout our history, if you think about it, public investment in infrastructure has literally transformed America, our attitudes as well as our opportunities. The Transcontinental Railroad, the interstate highways, united 2 oceans and brought a totally new age of progress to the United States of America. Universal public schools and college aid opened wide the doors of opportunity. Scientific breakthroughs took us to the moon. Now we're on Mars, discovering vaccines, gave us the internet, and so much more. These are investments we made together as one country, and investments that only the government was in a position to make. Time and again, they propel us into the future. That's why I proposed the American Jobs Plan, a once-in-a-generation investment in America itself. This is the largest jobs plan since World War II. Creates jobs to upgrade our transportation infrastructure. Jobs modernizing our roads, bridges, highways. Jobs building ports and airports, rail corridors, transit lines. It's clean water. And today, up to 10 million homes in America and more than 400,000 schools and child care centers have pipes with lead in them, including drinking water. A clear and present danger to our children's health. American Jobs Plan creates jobs replacing 100% of the nation's lead pipes and service lines so every American can drink clean water. And in the process, it will create thousands and thousands of good-paying jobs. It creates jobs connecting every American with high-speed internet, including 35% of the rural America that still doesn't have it. This is going to help our kids and our businesses succeed in the 21st century economy. And I'm asking the Vice President to lead this effort, if she would, because I know it will get done. Creates jobs building a modern power grid. Our grids are vulnerable to storms, hacks, catastrophic failures, with tragic results, as we saw in Texas and elsewhere during the winter storms. The American Jobs Plan will create jobs that lay thousands of miles of transmission lines needed to build a resilient and fully clean grid. We can do that. Look, the American Jobs Plan will help millions of people get back to their jobs and back to their careers. 2 million women have dropped out of the workforce during this pandemic. 2 million. And too often because they couldn't get the care they needed to care for their child or care for an elderly parent who needs help. 800,000 families are on the Medicare waiting list right now to get home care for their aging parent or loved one with disability. If you think it's not important, check out in your own district, Democrat or Republican. Democrat or Republican voters, their great concern, almost as much as their children, is taking care of an elderly loved one who can't be left alone. Medicaid contemplated it, but this plan is going to help those families and create jobs for our caregivers with better wages and better benefits, continuing a cycle of growth. For too long, we've failed to use the most important word when it comes to meeting the climate crisis: jobs. 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 For me, when I think climate change, I think jobs. American Jobs Plan will put engineers and construction workers to work building more energy efficient buildings and homes. Electrical workers, IBEW members installing 500,000 charging stations along our highways so we can own the electric car market. Farmers planting cover crops so they can reduce the carbon dioxide in the air and get paid for doing it. Look, think about it. There is simply no reason why the blades for wind turbines can't be built in Pittsburgh instead of Beijing. No reason. None. No reason. So, folks, there's no reason why American workers can't lead the world in the production of electric vehicles and batteries. I mean, there is no reason. We have the capacity. We're the brightest, best trained people in the world. The American Jobs Plan is going to create millions of good paying jobs, jobs Americans can raise a family on. As my dad would then say, with a little breathing room. And all the investments in the American Job Plan will be guided by one principle: buy American. Buy American. And I might note parenthetically, that does not violate any trade agreement. It's been the law since the 30s. Buy American. American tax dollars are going to be used to buy American products made in America to create American jobs. That's the way it's supposed to be, and it will be in this administration. And I made it clear to all my cabinet people, their ability to give exemptions has been strenuously limited. It will be American products. Now, I know some of you at home are wondering whether these jobs are for you. So many of you, so many of the folks I grew up with, feel left behind, forgotten, in an economy that's so rapidly changing. It's frightening. I want to speak directly to you, because you think about it. That's what people are most worried about. Can I fit in? Independent experts estimate the American Jobs Plan will add millions of jobs and trillions of dollars to economic growth in the years to come. It is a 8-year program. These are good paying jobs that can't be outsourced. Nearly 90% of the infrastructure jobs created in the American Jobs Plan do not require a college degree. 75% don't require an associate's degree. The American Jobs Plan is a blue-collar blueprint to build America. That's what it is. And it recognizes something I've always said in this chamber and the other. Good guys and women on Wall Street, but Wall Street didn't build this country. The middle class built the country, and unions built the middle class. So that's why I'm calling on Congress to pass Protect the Right to Organize Act, the PRO Act, and send it to my desk so we can support the right to unionize. And by the way, while you're thinking about sending things to my desk, let's raise the minimum wage to $15. No one working 40 hours a week, should live below the poverty line. We need to ensure greater equity and opportunity for women. And while we're doing this, let's get the Paycheck Fairness Act to my desk as well, equal pay. It's been much too long. And if you wonder whether it's too long, look behind me. And finally, American jobs plan will be the biggest increase in non-defense research and development on record. We'll see more technological change, and some of you know more about this than I do. We'll see more technological change in the next 10 years than we saw in the last 50. That's how rapidly artificial intelligence and so much more is changing. And we're falling behind the competition with the rest of the world. Decades ago, we used to invest 2% of our gross domestic product in America, 2% of our gross domestic product in research and development. Today, Mr. Secretary, that's less than 1%. China and other countries are closing in fast. We have to develop and dominate the products and technologies of the future. Advanced batteries, biotechnology, computer chips, clean energy. The Secretary of Defense can tell you, and those of you who work in national security issues know, the Defense Department has an agency called DARPA, the Defense Advanced Research Project Agency. The people who set up before I came here, and that's been a long time ago, to develop breakthroughs that enhance our national security. That's their only job. And it's a semi-separate agency. It's under the Defense Department. It's led to everything from the discovery of the internet to GPS and so much more that's enhanced our security. The National Institute of Health, the NIH, I believe, should create a similar advanced research projects agency for health. And now here's what it would do. It would have a singular purpose: to develop breakthroughs to prevent, detect, and treat diseases like Alzheimer's, diabetes, and cancer. I'll still never forget when we passed the cancer proposal in the last year as vice president. Almost $9 million going to NIH. And if excuse the point of personal privilege, I'll never forget you standing, Mitch, and saying, "Name it after my deceased son." It meant a lot. But so many of us have deceased sons, daughters, and relatives who died of cancer. I can think of no more worthy investment. I know of nothing that is more bipartisan. So let's end cancer as we know it. It's within our power. It's within our power to do it. Investments in jobs and infrastructure like the ones we're talking about have often had bipartisan support in the past. Vice President Harris and I met regularly in the Oval Office with Democrats and Republicans and discussed the jobs plan. And I applaud a group of Republican senators who just put forward their own proposal. So let's get to work. I wanted to lay out before the Congress my plan before we got into the deep discussions. I'd like to meet with those who have ideas that are different, they think are better. I welcome those ideas. But the rest of the world is not waiting for us. I just want to be clear. From my perspective, doing nothing is not an option. Look, we can't be so busy competing with one another that we forget the competition that we have with the rest of the world to win the 21st century. Secretary Blinken can tell you, I spent a lot of time with President Xi. Traveled over 17,000 miles with him. Spent, they tell me, over 24 hours in private discussions with him. When he called to congratulate him, we had a 2-hour discussion. He's deadly earnest about becoming the most significant, consequential nation in the world. He and others, autocrats, think that democracy can't compete in the 21st century with autocracies because it takes too long to get consensus. To win that competition for the future, in my view, we also need to make a once-in-a-generation investment in our families and our children. That's why I've introduced the American Families Plan tonight, which addresses four of the biggest challenges facing American families and in turn America. First is access to good education. When this nation made 12 years of public education universal in the last century, it made us the best educated, best prepared nation in the world. It's, I believe, the overwhelming reason that propelled us to where we got in the 20th century. But the world's caught up or catching up. They're not waiting. I would say parenthetically, if we were sitting down, we set a bipartisan committee together and said, okay, we're going to decide what we do in terms of government providing for free education. I wonder whether we'd think, as we did in the 20th century, that 12 years is enough in the 21st century. I doubt it. 12 years is no longer enough today to compete with the rest of the world in the 21st century. That's why my American Families Plan guarantees 4 additional years of public education for every person in America, starting as early as we can. The great universities in this country have conducted studies of the last 10 years. It shows that adding 2 years of universal high-quality preschool for every 3-year-old and 4-year-old, no matter what background they come from, puts them in a position to be able to compete all the way through 12 years and increases exponentially their prospect of graduating and going on beyond graduation. Research shows when a young child goes to school, not daycare, they're far more likely to graduate from high school and go to college or something after high school. When you add 2 years of free community college on top of that, you begin to change the dynamic. We can do that. And we'll increase Pell Grants and invest in historical black colleges and universities, tribal colleges, minority-serving institutions. The reason is they don't have the endowments. But their students are just as capable of learning about cybersecurity, just as capable of learning about metallurgy, all the things that are going on that provide those jobs of the future. Jill is a community college professor who teaches today as First Lady. She's long said, if I've heard it once, I've heard it 1,000 times. Joe, any country that out-educates us is going to outcompete us. She'll be deeply involved in leading this effort. Thank you, Jill. Second thing we need, American Families Plan will provide access to quality, affordable child care. We guarantee what I'm proposing in legislation, we guarantee that low and middle income families will pay no more than 7% of their income for high quality care for children up to the age of 5. The most hard pressed working families won't have to spend a dime. Third, the American Families Plan will finally provide up to 12 weeks of paid leave and medical leave, family medical leave. We're one of the few industrial countries in the world. No one should have to choose between a job and a paycheck or taking care of themselves and their loved ones or parent or spouse or child. And fourth, the American Family Plan puts directly into the pockets of millions of Americans. In March, we expanded tax credit for every child in a family, up to $3,000 per child if they're under 6 years of age. Over 6 years of age. And $3,600 for children over 6 years of age. With 2 parents, 2 kids, that's $7,200 in the pockets that are going to help take care of your family. And that will help more than 65 million children and help cut child care poverty in half. And we can afford it. So we did that in the last piece of legislation we passed. But let's extend that child care tax credit at least through the end of 2025. The American Rescue Plan lowered health care premiums for 9 million Americans who buy their coverage under the Affordable Care Act. I know that's really popular this side of the aisle. But let's make that provision permanent so their premiums don't go back up. In addition to my family's plan, I'm going to work with Congress to address this year other critical priorities for American families. The Affordable Care Act has been a lifeline for millions of Americans, protecting people with pre-existing conditions, protecting women's health, and the pandemic has demonstrated how badly it's needed. Let's lower deductibles for working families on the Affordable Care Act. And let's lower prescription drug costs. We know how to do this. The last president had that as an objective. We all know how outrageously expensive drugs are in America. In fact, we pay the highest prescription drug prices of anywhere in the world, right here in America. Nearly 3 times for the same drug, nearly 3 times what other countries pay. We have to change that, and we can. Let's do what we talked about for all the years I was down here in this body, in Congress. Let's give Medicare the power to save hundreds of billions of dollars by negotiating lower drug prescription prices. By the way, it won't just help people on Medicare. Lower prescription drug costs for everyone. And the money we save, which is billions of dollars, can go to strengthen the Affordable Care Act and expand Medicare coverage benefits without costing taxpayers an additional penny. It's within our power to do it. Let's do it now. We've talked about it long enough, Democrats and Republicans. Let's get it done this year. This is all about a simple premise. Health care should be a right, not a privilege in America. So, how do we pay for my jobs and family plan? I made it clear we can do it without increasing the deficits. Let's start with what I will not do. I will not impose any tax increase on people making less than $400,000. But it's time for corporate America and the wealthiest 1% of Americans to just begin to pay their fair share. Just their fair share. Sometimes I have arguments with my friends in the Democratic Party. I think you should be able to become a billionaire and a millionaire, but pay your fair share. A recent study shows that 55 of the nation's biggest corporations paid 0 federal tax last year. Those 55 corporations made in excess of $40 billion in profit. A lot of companies also evade taxes through tax havens in Switzerland and Bermuda and the Cayman Islands. And they benefit from tax loopholes and deductions for offshoring jobs and shifting profits overseas. It's not right. We're going to reform corporate taxes so they pay their fair share and help pay for the public investments their businesses will benefit from as well. We're going to reward work, not just wealth. We take the top tax bracket for the wealthiest 1% of Americans, those making over $400,000 or more, back up to where it was when George W. Bush was president, when he started, 39.6%. That's where it was when George W. was president. We're going to get rid of the loopholes, allow Americans to make more than $1 million a year and pay a lower tax rate on their capital gains than Americans who receive a paycheck. We're only going to affect 0.3% of all Americans by that action, 0.3%. And the IRS is going to crack down on millionaires and billionaires who cheat on their taxes. It's estimated to be billions of dollars by think tanks that are left, right, and center. I'm not looking to punish anybody, but I will not add a tax burden, additional tax burden to the middle class in this country. They're already paying enough. I believe what I propose is fair, fiscally responsible, and it raises revenue to pay for the plans I propose and will create millions of jobs that will grow the economy and enhance our financial standing in the country. When you hear someone say they don't want to raise taxes on the wealthiest 1% or corporate America, ask them whose taxes you want to raise. Instead, who's they're going to cut? Look, the big tax cut of 2017. Remember, it was supposed to pay for itself. That was how it was sold. And generate vast economic growth. Instead, it added $2 trillion to the deficit. It was a huge windfall for corporate America and those at the very top. Instead of using the tax saving to raise wages and invest in research and development, it poured billions of dollars into the pockets of CEOs. In fact, the pay gap between CEOs and their workers is now among the largest in history. According to one study, CEOs make 320 times what the average worker in their corporation makes. Used to be below 100. The pandemic has only made things worse. 20 million Americans lost their job in the pandemic, working and middle-class Americans. At the same time, roughly 650 billionaires in America saw their net worth increase by more than $1 trillion in the same exact period. Let me say it again. 650 people increased their wealth by more than $1 trillion during this pandemic. And they're now worth more than $4 trillion. My fellow Americans, trickle down. Trickle down economics has never worked. And it's time to grow the economy from the bottom and the middle out. You know, there's a broad consensus of economists left, right, and center, and they agree what I'm proposing will help create millions of jobs and generate historic economic growth. These are among the highest values investments we can make as a nation. I've often said our greatest strength is the power of our example, not just the example of our power. In my conversations with world leaders, and I've spoken to over 38, 40 of them now, I've made it known that America's back. And you know what they say? The comment I hear most of all from them? So they say, we see America's back, but for how long? But for how long? My fellow Americans, we have to show not just that we're back, but that we're back to stay, and that we aren't going to go it alone. We're going to do it by leading with our allies. No one nation can deal with all the crises of our time, from terrorism to nuclear proliferation, mass migration, cybersecurity, climate change, as well as what we're experiencing now, pandemics. There's no wall high enough to keep any virus out. And our own vaccine supply, as it grows to meet our needs, and we're meeting them, will become an arsenal for vaccines for other countries. just as America was the arsenal for democracy for the world, and in consequence influenced the world. But every American will have access before that occurs. Every American will have access to be fully covered by COVID-19 from the vaccines we have. Look, the climate crisis is not our fight alone, it's a global fight. The United States accounts, as all of you know, less than 15% of carbon emissions. The rest of the world accounts for 85%. That's why I kept my commitment to rejoin the Paris Accord, because if we do everything perfectly, it's not going to only matter. I kept my commitment to convene a climate summit right here in America with all the major economies of the world: China, Russia, India, European Union. And I said I'd do it in my first 100 days. I want to be very blunt about it. I had my attempt was to make sure that the world could see there was a consensus, that we are at an inflection point in history. The consensus is if we act to save the planet, we can create millions of jobs and economic growth and opportunity to raise the standard of living of almost everyone around the world. If you watched any of it and you were all busy, I'm sure you didn't have much time. That's what virtually every nation said, even the ones that aren't doing their fair share. The investments I proposed tonight also advance the foreign policy, in my view, that benefits the middle class. That means making sure every nation plays by the same rules in the global economy, including China. In my discussion with President Xi, I told him, we welcome the competition. We're not looking for conflict. But I made absolutely clear that we will defend America's interest across the board. America will stand up to unfair trade practices that undercut American workers and American industries, like subsidies from state to state-owned operations and enterprises, and the theft of American technology and intellectual property. I also told President Xi that we'll maintain a strong military presence in the Indo-Pacific, just as we do with NATO and Europe, not to start a conflict, but to prevent one. I told them what I've said to many world leaders, that America will not back away from our commitments, our commitment to human rights and fundamental freedoms and to our alliances. And I pointed out to him, no responsible American president could remain silent when basic human rights are being so blatantly violated. An American president has to represent the essence of what our country stands for. America is an idea, the most unique idea in history. We are created, all of us, equal. It's who we are. And we cannot walk away from that principle and, in fact, say we're dealing with the American idea. With regard to Russia, I know it concerns some of you, but I made very clear to Putin that we're not going to seek escalation, but their actions will have consequences. They turn out to be true, and they turned out to be true. So I responded directly and proportionally to Russia's interference in our elections and the cyber attacks on our government and our business. They did both of these things, and I told them we would respond, and we have. But we can also cooperate when it's our mutual interest. We did it when we extended the New START Treaty on nuclear arms, and we're working to do it on climate change. But he understands we will respond. On Iran and North Korea, nuclear programs that present serious threats to American security and the security of the world. We're going to be working closely with our allies to address the threats posed by both of these countries through diplomacy as well as stern deterrence. And American leadership means ending the forever war in Afghanistan. We have without hyperbole, the greatest fighting force in the history of the world. I'm the first president in 40 years who knows what it means to have a son serving in a war zone. Today, we have service members serving in the same war zone as their parents did. We have service members in Afghanistan who are not yet born on 9/11. The war in Afghanistan, as we remember the debates here, were never meant to be multi-generational undertakings of nation building. We went to Afghanistan to get the terrorists who attacked us on 9/11, and we said we would follow Osama bin Laden to the gates of hell to do it. If you've been in the upper Konar Valley, you've kind of seen the gates of hell. And we delivered justice to bin Laden. We degraded the terrorist threat of al-Qaeda in Afghanistan. And after 20 years of valor, and sacrifice, it's time to bring those troops home. Look, even as we do, we'll maintain over-the-horizon capacity to suppress future threats to the homeland. Make no mistake, in 20 years, terrorism has metastasized. The threat has evolved way beyond Afghanistan. Those of you in the intelligence committees, the foreign relations committee, defense committees, you know well, we have to remain vigilant against the threats to the United States wherever they come from. Al-Qaeda and ISIS are in Yemen, Syria, Somalia, other places in Africa, in the Middle East, and beyond. And we won't ignore what our intelligence agencies have determined to be the most lethal terrorist threat to the homeland today. White supremacy is terrorism. We're not going to ignore that either. My fellow Americans, look, we have to come together to heal the soul of this nation. It was nearly a year ago before her father's funeral when I spoke with Gianna Floyd, George Floyd's young daughter. She's a little tyke, so I was kneeling down to talk to her so I could look her in the eye. She looked at me, she said, "My daddy changed the world." Well, after the conviction of George Floyd's murderer, we can see how right she was if we have the courage to act as a Congress. We've all seen the knee of injustice on the neck of Black Americans. Now's our opportunity to make some real progress. The vast majority of men and women wearing a uniform and a badge serve our communities, and they serve them honorably. I know them. I know they want to help meet this moment as well. My fellow Americans, we have to come together to rebuild trust between law enforcement and the people they serve, to root out systemic racism in our criminal justice system, and to enact police reform in George Floyd's name that passed the House already. I know Republicans have their own ideas and are engaged in very productive discussions with Democrats in the Senate. We need to work together to find a consensus. But let's get it done next month, by the first anniversary of George Floyd's death. The country supports this reform, and Congress should act. We have a giant opportunity to bend the arc of the moral universe toward justice, real justice. And with the plans outlined tonight, we have a real chance to root out systemic racism that plagues America and American lives in other ways. A chance to deliver real equity, good jobs, good schools, affordable housing, clean air, clean water, being able to generate wealth and pass it down through generations because you have access to purchase a house. Real opportunities in the lives of more Americans, Black, white, Latino, Asian Americans, Native Americans. Look, I also want to thank the United States Senate for voting 94-1 to pass the COVID-19 Hate Crimes Act to protect Asian American and Pacific Islanders. You acted decisively. You can see on television the viciousness of the hate crimes we've seen over the past year and for too long. I urge the House to do the same and send that legislation to my desk, which I will gladly, anxiously sign. I also hope Congress will get to my desk the Equality Act to protect LGBTQ Americans. For all transgender Americans watching at home, especially young people, you're so brave. I want you to know your president has your back. Another thing, let's authorize the Violence Against Women Act, which has been law for 27 years. "27 years ago, I wrote it. It'll close the act that has to be authorized now, will close the boyfriend loophole to keep guns out of the hands of abusers. The court order said this is an abuser. You can't own a gun. It's to close that loophole that existed. You know, it's estimated that 50 women are shot and killed by an intimate partner every month in America. 50 a month. Let's pass it and save some lives. And I need not tell anyone this, but gun violence has become an epidemic in America. The flag at the White House was still flying at half-mast for the 8 victims of the mass shooting in Georgia, when 10 more lives were taken in a mass shooting in Colorado. And in the week in between those two events, 250 other Americans were shot dead in the streets of America. 250 shot dead. I know how hard it is to make progress on this issue. In the 90s, we passed universal background checks, a ban on assault weapons and high-capacity magazines that hold 100 rounds that can be fired off in seconds. We beat the NRA. Mass shootings and gun violence declined. Check out the report over 10 years. But in the early 2000s, the law expired. We've seen daily bloodshed since. I'm not saying if the law continued, we wouldn't see bloodshed. More than 2 weeks ago in the Rose Garden, surrounded by some of the bravest people I know, the survivors and families who lost loved ones to gun violence, I laid out several of the Department of Justice actions that are being taken to impact on this epidemic. One of them is banning so-called ghost guns. These are homemade guns built from a kit that includes directions how to finish the firearm. The parts have no serial numbers, so they show up at crime scenes and they can't be traced. The buyers of these ghost gun kits aren't required to pass any background check. Anyone, from a criminal or terrorist, could buy this kit and within 30 minutes have a weapon that's lethal, but no more. And I'll do everything in my power to protect the American people from this epidemic of gun violence, but it's time for Congress to act as well. I don't want to become confrontational, but we need more Senate Republicans to join the overwhelming majority of Democratic colleagues and close the loopholes required in background check purchases of guns. We need a ban on assault weapons and high-capacity magazines. And don't tell me it can't be done. We did it before and it worked. Talk to most responsible gun owners and hunters. They'll tell you there's no possible justification for having 100 rounds in a weapon. What do you think, deer wearing Kevlar vests? They'll tell you that there are too many people today who are able to buy a gun, but shouldn't be able to buy a gun. These kinds of reasonable reforms have overwhelming support from the American people, including many gun owners. The country supports reform, and Congress should act. This shouldn't be a red or blue issue. And no amendment to the Constitution is absolute. You can't yell fire in a crowded theater. From the very beginning, there were certain guns, weapons, that could not be owned by Americans. Certain people could not own those weapons ever. We're not changing the Constitution. We're being reasonable. I think this is not a Democrat or Republican issue. I think it's an American issue. And here's what else we can do. Immigration has always been essential to America. Let's end our exhausting war over immigration. For more than 30 years, politicians have talked about immigration reform, and we've done nothing about it. It's time to fix it. On day one of my presidency, I kept my commitment and sent a comprehensive immigration bill to the United States Congress. If you believe we need to secure the border, pass it because it has a lot of money for high-tech border security. If you believe in a pathway to citizenship, pass it. It's over 11 million undocumented folks, the vast majority of here overstaying visas. Pass it. We can actually, if you actually want to solve a problem, I've sent a bill to take a close look at it.
1 minute.
We also have to get at the root problem of why people are fleeing, particularly to our southern border from Guatemala, Honduras, and El Salvador. The violence, the corruption, the gangs, the political instability, hunger, hurricanes, earthquakes, natural disasters. When I was president, when I was vice president, the president asked me to focus on providing help needed to address the root causes of migration. And it helped keep people in their own countries instead of being forced to leave. The plan was working, but the last administration decided it was not worth it. I'm restoring the program and asked Vice President Harris to lead our diplomatic effort to take care of this. I have absolute confidence she'll get the job done. Now look, if you don't like my plan, let's at least pass what we all agree on. Congress needs to pass legislation this year to finally secure protection for dreamers.
And that is the first approximately 55 minutes of Biden's address to a joint session of Congress last night, not called a State of the Union. We'll be coming back to close this out. There are just about 6 more minutes. We're going to be coming back on the other side of this short break to close that out, and then we'll get into conversation between ourselves and with guests. You're listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. Be back on the other side of this short break.
Listening to Radio Sputnik. Telling the untold.
Fault lines.
Live from the divided states of America, precipitously perched at the edge of this resilient and exploited globe. Welcome to your context lens for the American perspective. In the left corner, I am the ever-vigilant, indefatigable political analyst, Jamarl Thomas.
And in the independent corner, I am your political analyst, Shane Stranahan.
And that would strongly imply that you are listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. So we've been listening to Joe Biden's not State of the Union address. It's very strange just because it looks like a State of the Union. It has this kind of pomp and circumstance, but it's not a State of the Union address. We're going to go back to it. We listened to the first segment of it. We have about 6, 7, maybe 10 minutes left of the speech. So without further ado, Joe Biden.
The young people have only known America as their home. And permanent protection for immigrants who are here on temporary protective status who came from countries beset by man-made and natural-made violence and disaster, as well as a pathway to citizenship for foreign workers who put food on our tables. Look, immigrants have done so much for America during this pandemic and throughout our history. The country supports immigration reform. We should act. Let's argue over it. Let's debate it. But let's act. And if we truly want to restore the soul of America, we need to protect the sacred right to vote. Most people more people voted in the last presidential election than any time in American history, in the middle of the worst pandemic ever. It should be celebrated. Instead, it's being attacked. Congress should pass H.R. 1 and the John Lewis Voting Rights Act and send it to my desk right away. The country supports it, and Congress should act now. Look, in conclusion, as we gather here tonight, the image of a violent mob assaulting this Capitol, desecrating our democracy, remain vivid in all our minds. Lives were put at risk, many of your lives. Lives were lost. Extraordinary courage was summoned. The insurrection was an existential crisis, a test of whether our democracy could survive, and it did. But the struggle is far from over. The question of whether our democracy will long endure is both ancient and urgent. As old as our republic, still vital today. Can our democracy deliver on its promise that all of us, created equal in the image of God, had a chance to lead lives of dignity, respect, and possibility? Can our democracy deliver to the most pressing needs of our people? Can our democracy overcome the lies, anger, hate, and fears that have pulled us apart? America's adversaries, the autocrats of the world, are betting we can't. And I promise you, they're betting we can't. They believe we're too full of anger and division and rage. They look at the images of the mob that assaulted the Capitol as proof that the sun is setting on American democracy. But they're wrong. You know it, I know it. But we have to prove them wrong. We have to prove democracy still works, that our government still works, and we can deliver for our people. In our first 100 days together, we've acted to restore people's faith in democracy to deliver. We're vaccinating the nation. We're creating hundreds of thousands of new jobs. We're delivering real results to people. They can see it, feel it in their own lives. Opening doors of opportunity, guaranteeing some more fairness and justice. That's the essence of America. That's democracy in action. Our Constitution opens with the words, as trite as it sounds, we the people. Well, it's time to remember that we the people are the government. You and I. Not some force in a distant capital. Not some powerful force that we have no control over. It's us. It's we the people. In another era, when our democracy was tested, Franklin Roosevelt reminded us, in America, we do our part. We all do our part. That's all I'm asking. That we do our part, all of us. And if we do that, we will meet the center challenge of the age by proving that democracy is durable and strong. Autocrats will not win the future. We will. America will. And the future belongs to America. As I stand here tonight before you in a new and vital hour of life and democracy of our nation, and I can say with absolute confidence, I have never been more confident or optimistic about America. Not because I'm president, because of what's happening with the American people. We've stared into the abyss of insurrection and autocracy, pandemic and pain, and we, the people, did not flinch. At the very moment our adversaries were certain we'd pull apart and fail, we came together, we united. With light and hope, we summoned a new strength, new resolve to position us to win the competition of the 21st century. On our way to a union more perfect, more prosperous, and more just, as one people, one nation, and one America. Folks, as I told every world leader I've ever met with over the years, it's never, ever, ever been a good bet to bet against America, and it still isn't. We're the United States of America. There is not a single thing, nothing beyond our capacity. We can do whatever we set our minds to if we do it together. So let's begin to get together. God bless you all, and may God protect our troops. Thank you for your patience.
This was an interesting speech by Joe Biden. I can't say it was a bad one, but let's do this. We're going to have a conversation about it, Shane and I, and we're going to bring on some guests, almost like a panel discussion. Margaret Kimberly, Kimma Iverson, and of course, Carmine Sabia. He's going to come up next. He's going to be our right appraisal of it. So let's do that. Let's take a break. You guys are listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. We will be back in a moment.
Want to talk? Get in touch with us at radio@sputniknews.com.
So, Sean, what do you want to talk about today?
Well, Bob, that's easy. I want to talk about the need to stop the development of self-driving cars.
Again, Sean, you're driving me nuts. I think the self-driving car thing's already out of the gate.
No, it's never too late. See, now the leading experts in the field, I mean, just pick one, whichever one, leading experts have repeatedly warned us about the dangers of artificial intelligence. Look, I'm telling you, man, we have to stop the robots by any means necessary.
I see what you did there.
Yep.
Tune into our show By Any Means Necessary daily from 2 to 4 p.m. Eastern Time on Radio Sputnik. And don't forget to call in at 3:20 p.m. to our studio number 202-521-1320.
And if you miss us live, check us out on SputnikNews.com, Spreaker, iTunes, iHeartRadio, Spotify, or wherever you listen to podcasts to stay up to date on the latest political, social, and economic movements shaping the world around us.
Fault Lines.
And we are back. You're listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. After listening, if you did listen to the whole thing, assuming you didn't hear it last night, or you maybe wanted to catch it a second time in full, after listening in full to President Biden's not State of the Union, his address to a joint session of Congress last night, his first address this year. And the big thing, I mean, since Reagan, it's been the practice that the first address of the president to a Congress in his first year, in his first term, isn't called a State of the Union. And it makes sense, kind of, because he's new to the office. Usually they do it within the first month or so after taking office. It's either late January, and in most recent cases, it's February. What's weird about this one is how long it took. Now, this might just addressing context before we get into the speech, which I don't think was actually very good. Maybe we can go back and forth on that. I think that his delivery was pretty stilted and slow. He whispered too much. And the New York Times tried to prettify this by saying it was an intimate setting with only, approximately 200 members of Congress there, 200 members of Congress and officials, instead of the usual 1,600 that are invited. The idea is, okay, there are less people there, and therefore you feel like you're a little bit more justified speaking in sotto voce or something in a quiet voice to those who are present. I just think that's Biden's way of talking. So I would criticize him on that. Anyway, though, what's weird about this is how long it took him to get to it. Now, you might try to chalk that up to the attempted insurrection or the breach of the Capitol, whatever you want to call it, lingering security concerns there. I've heard some people make it about the ongoing pandemic, which, there is an ongoing pandemic, and it's still pretty severe. Almost 1,000 deaths recorded yesterday. That's still not a good situation. However, they went through with it. I would have thought they could have done that back in February too, under these same conditions, with people, sitting in the building there, socially distanced, sitting 6 feet apart as they were, wearing masks as they were. I would think they could have done that, mid-late February, even early March. I don't know. It feels weirdly delayed, and that's what's strange to me about this. I don't think that it was a very good speech. Whoever wrote it, whichever team of people or whichever person wrote it, they tried to make it Biden-esque. They tried to put it in sort of plain, simple terms, use the word folks a lot, that kind of thing. That doesn't mean that it was actually a good speech. It felt to me like it rambled. I will come back for a second, just because we played it in full last week, to Putin's State of the Nation address. He addressed domestic concerns, then he moved to foreign policy concerns, and then he kind of came back to summarize and close the speech out. In this one, Biden admittedly focused first on domestic concerns, then he moved to foreign concerns, then he came back at length to domestic concerns, talking about everything from gun control to the migrant crisis, immigration. It's almost like he tried to put all the stuff that he was sort of more excited about, like his new plan, the American Families Plan. It's like he tried to front load that in the speech and then come back to the stuff that he isn't so fond of in the second half. Now, whether that's intentional or not, I can only guess. I would assume so. He starts with the positive and then he kind of gets into the more negative elements, but it still felt weirdly disjointed. And for all of the alliteration that he used and for all of the sort of, somewhat clever colloquialisms, whatever, I don't think that makes it a good speech, and I don't think that makes it good politics. And it's unclear. It's kind of hard to hear, but Republicans booted at a few key points, as you would expect them to, specifically when Biden's talking about the $15 minimum wage, when he's going over some of the provisions of the American Families Plan. It's kind of unclear from the president whether he expects or will demand a buy-in from Republicans. And it's like he's sort of trying to straddle the line between the two, trying to, on the one hand, paint himself as a friendly, conciliatory president working to, planning to work across party lines, planning to compromise on key points. And then on the other hand, and it's put in the speech, the world will not wait, that line, basically the idea that, he's not going to wait for Republicans to catch up. Well, which is it? That feels disjointed. It doesn't feel like he's doing the negotiation tactic that you might expect from Trump. It feels like there's a mixed message there that indicates a mixed response. Jamarl, what's your take on that?
On that very specific point? So he, at one point in the speech, he's talking about guns. He says, I don't want to be confrontational. And it's like, why not? I mean, you've just told me that hundreds of people have died from gun violence. That's what you just said. And on top of saying that, you then turn around and says, I need Republicans to buy in. And he says, quote, I don't want to be confrontational on this. Why not? I mean, an argument can be made that the way Joe Biden has run this presidency on some level has been successful, even if I disagree with some of the ways that it's gone through. And a lot of that has to do with Republicans' inability to attack this candidate, Joe Biden, this president. Have you noticed that? I mean, they chose Tim Scott to give a rebuttal. Tim Scott, the one black Republican or something. And it's like you chose him specifically for the issue of race because you feel like that's your weakest point. You wanted to be able to rebut this notion of race. And Joe Biden's speech wasn't about race. Like, Joe Biden would never come out and say America is a racist country because from him as a politician, he doesn't function that way. Like for the gun violence thing, Chauvin is unique and specific unto himself. That's the way Joe Biden is going to talk about that. He's not going to alienate a large aspect of the base or of white voters that he believes he needs to get elected and to win. So putting Tim Scott to do that, it seems to just not understand the candidate or the person they're dealing with. And on top of that, fundamentally misses the point that this speech was more so about economics. They miss it. If you wanted to hit Joe Biden on the speech, you hit him on the speech, even as Republicans from the left. Hey, Joe Biden, those communities, how are these kids going to go to school? Yeah, it's great that you're giving them pre-K, but if they're walking through war zones in Chirac, how is this going to help their ability to go to school? That's how you attack Joe Biden on this. How are these communities that are in decay? Kim Klyak, whatever her name is, I'm screwing her name up, the one from Maryland, did that video, her walking through dilapidated communities, saying this is what voting for Democrats have gotten you. That's the way you hit Joe Biden. That's the way you hit Joe Biden. That's the way you hit Democrats. It's like, look at these communities. Now, the catch is, as Republicans, you're not going to do anything about it anyway. But maybe you should. Maybe if your ability to attack Joe Biden on this has been that much frayed, maybe you need to change your politics. Maybe you need to change on some level and make yourself more appealing to the population, as opposed to this, we're going to fight for the rich, full stop, full-throatedly, period. Maybe Mitt Romney is the candidate that you're looking for in regards to what is our politics going to look like going forward. Because what's going to happen, and the lefties, progressives, and everything else, they may not agree with this now, but this will be the reality of it. Joe Biden is a tick to the left of what you would have expected Joe Biden to be. Meaning for the 47 years that he's been in Congress or whatever else, he's been a certain candidate, a war hawk, all of this stuff. But it seems that in the speech, he's recognizing that there's a competition that is taking place and the United States is no longer a unipolar power. And within the context of that we're being left behind because of this kind of rape person capitalism that takes place in this country. And so it seems like on some level, this speech is, okay, we're losing this. We need to change and we need to invest more into our country. But the question, and this kind of gets something that you say all the time, Shane, if the changes that you're making are not radical and fundamental to why there are problems, is it going to do what you want it to do? Now, I would say that this doesn't go far enough in fixing anything. And if, for example, I give a perfect example. The idea of, okay, we're going to give extra to school. Yeah, but you have people who are living in dilapidated communities. Is it that more pertinent for education and success and the elimination of crime than the other part, than the school? Yes, school is important, but what about the other part? Are you not going to deal with that? Like, what are you doing about Chirac? What are you doing about that? That's a big deal. And that's not just in Chicago. That's in other places in the United States. More importantly, Joe Biden acts as if he's shocked to see poverty in the United States. Los Angeles has a homeless community that is basically a city of homeless. That was there before COVID. I mean, 47% of the population was making, $18,000 or 42%, $18,000 a year or less? That was a poverty wage before COVID. Like, he's acting like this stuff is new. Oh, whoa, I just stumbled across this. What about the lead in the water? Joe Biden just admitted that there's all of these communities across the United States with lead in the water. How long have you known this? What has been the educational impact of this? What has been the health impact of this? How many kids do you estimate have gone to jail because of the mental issues that have been associated with lead in the water en masse across the United States, where kids and adults have been drinking and bathing? And how long have you known this? This is a big deal in some of the things that he's admitting to. And so, yeah, I mean, the speech, I didn't think the speech was bad, personally. And I thought, personally, the speech was probably going to be received quite well. I mean, he's inviting to Republicans. He's not being aggressive in the way that he's doing it. He's trying to be this kind of grandfatherly type figure. I don't know. I had a different feeling of the speech. I was more annoyed by it. So, like the $15 an hour minimum wage stuff. And me, I'm annoyed by the politics of it because I think the politics works and the politics shouldn't work. So the $15 an hour, or for that matter, the PRO Act, I don't believe for a moment Joe Biden is backing those things. I do believe that the unions and, let's say, lefties have been putting enough pressure on him where he has to vocally say it. So in every moment where the term union comes up, they're the backbone of America, he will say that. He will say it very strongly. But it's different than saying it versus the people who are pulling your strings and say, look, you can say it all you want. You better not for one moment put that up. Otherwise, you're going to lose every bit of donation that we are giving you. And I think that's the thing that's more important. So it's like, yes, you give a vocal nod to it. You give that. Yes, there's enough power in regards to the people who are backing you where you do that. But the reality of it is, will you put your foot in it? Will you give your political will to it? Will you get out there and make speeches for it? Will you pull people like Joe Manchin into your room and say, look, I need you to back this? Will you get rid of the parliamentarian if she tries to stop you from putting that into some kind of budget reconciliation? Will you get rid of the filibuster to make your priorities known? And to that answer, the answer is no. And so giving a verbal nod to something that you know in no way possible would get across your desk without you putting emphasis and strength into it, yeah, that annoys me. Because I know for the most part, the public looks at it and says, whoa, Joe Biden is giving a nod to that. The press is going to say, wow, Joe Biden seems to support that. And not one of them are going to bring up the point that Joe Biden is not going to use the power of his presidency to get it passed. It's just words. It's political
These
fodder.
aren't Biden's policies. These aren't Biden's policies. I don't
What
know.
you mean for over the 47 years? No, they're not. This is different.
And what does that mean? What does that mean? What that means is that if the team that he has behind him is pushing these policies. They have his buy-in, and they're writing up the proposals. They're pushing, and in some sense, that's par for the course. But what makes it different this time is Biden is a 78-year-old man. He does not. He lacks political vitality.
Yeah.
I'm surprised, and I'm glad that he was able to make it through the whole speech, because I'm sure many people couldn't. That's the thing, is if you hear his delivery, it's he has effectively two tones, which is normal Biden, and then he kind of goes. I don't know. I'm not even going to try to imitate it.
I think he's trying to relate. I think he's trying to be like an intimacy, like where he's trying to like slow it, like a whisper in, like he's draws you in because he's whispering, that type of thing. I think he's trying to do it. I don't know how effective that is.
That's his way of doing it.
Yeah.
Well, that's the thing. I don't think it is that effective. People do like it. If you look at the early polling, most people, 85% of people approved of it. I think it was 7 out of 10 people said that the speech left them feeling optimistic.
See?
I don't.
That's what I mean.
Yeah, I hear you. No, I hear you. People like it, but that doesn't frankly mean that it's a good speech. I think people like hearing from him because they actually haven't in a very long time, because he's been so damn absent, and I don't think you can put too fine a point on this, or I don't think you can make too much of this.
But keep going. I don't think that's fair.
People hate Trump. Most people in the United States have been trained to hate Trump, and they just don't like him regardless. A lot of people didn't like him before he became president, because fairly notorious reality TV show host and longtime businessman, and widely criticized before he became president. And now, when he became president, people had plenty more reason to hate him. I think most people are just gratified. They're just happy to see somebody who's not Trump. They're happy to see a not Trump person address Congress from the office of the president.
I do think that's true in part. Where it's like, if I like tensing a muscle, like the muscle relaxes and you're like, thank you. It just feels good just to be, right? But I do think there's something to be said that this speech was meant to be hopeful. I think it was. It's Biden's version of hopeful.
Yeah, that's how he closed it out. That's how he closed it out. But here's the thing. Is that justified? He said that, I'm paraphrasing slightly, but that Americans are more united than they're united on the other side of the insurrection, of the pandemic and pain, united against autocracy, that kind of thing.
Yeah.
Are they? Or was it just last year that Proud Boys and Antifa were killing each other, or getting close, in the streets? There were constant infighting, among the American body politic. There is this ongoing culture war that, as far as I can tell, might have abated slightly earlier this year, but it seems to have just gone into a little bit of dormancy. It doesn't seem like in any way the fundamental tensions have been resolved. They've just been left to fester. And again, here's another way of putting this. We're going to come back to this later as we get into more of the policy conversation. But is the next president going to be a Democrat or a Republican? And if they're going to be a Republican, which seems likely to me,
no, it's
either going to be Trump. I think it would be. It's either going to be Trump or somebody to the right of Trump. It's either going to be Trump or somebody to the right of Trump is my best guess. And what happens then? The culture war stuff, which again, if it's gone dormant for a little while, that's not because it's gone away. It just seems like that's going to come back, and it's going to come back stronger. There's like a lull in the culture war hysteria in what appears to be late stage pandemic or something like that, where people are feeling a little bit more optimistic because they're getting vaccinated, because things are opening up again. If you want the cause for the optimism, I would say it's simply that people are able to get out in the streets again, either now, recently, or soon, because vaccination has rolled out effectively. And, there's cause for optimism there. It's not because of what Biden said. It's because of what his administration, along with Trump's administration, did with the vaccine rollout.
Well, I'm not saying there's cause for optimism. I said the speech is optimistic. There's a difference in those things. Also, I have no reason to believe that the next president is going to be a Republican, especially since Republicans can't even attack Joe Biden's position. And until they get some kind of language, until they get some kind of ability to pierce what it is to be Joe Biden, they're not going to get in office. How can they get in office if they can't even make an argument against what Joe Biden is saying here? And there is a way to do it. They just don't seem to have the capability of doing it. I mean, the speech is getting high marks, so it doesn't really matter if you think it sucks. My appraisal of the speech doesn't really matter. That's kind of why I say the speech was probably going to be received quite well. And by your own estimates and the polling, it was. So, look, there are certain things that I wish was critiqued more about Joe Biden. The $15 thing, I wish that was pinned on him like nobody's business, and yet it's not. The media's not going to touch it. And you can even argue, said, look, it's just because of Trump. It's just because this alteration and this tense situation with Trump, and then the relaxing of it, and Joe Biden's just in the relaxing of it, and so people feel that could be fair, that could be true. I'm just saying the way Joe Biden was framing this speech, even, I don't know if you paying attention to it, but his argument about child credit, his argument about, hey, we need to deal with the income inequality, he's saying that stuff for the specific reason that, A, is politically liked, meaning increasing taxes on the rich and everything else. They always ask, how are you going to pay for it? So this is a way of saying, I'm going to pay for it like this. But if you listen to some of the things that these guys are saying behind the scenes, it's also, we need to take down the culture war stuff. And the way that we do this is through economics. That's the argument that he is making here. If you listen to him and if you read the stuff that he's been saying, like Democrats are talking about, the fighting, the conflict, the people at each other's throats, they believe that part of the reason for that is an economic reality, and because the people have gotten that much more fraught in regards to their economic situation.
Going to get that through? Are the Democrats going to be able to pass
this
catch. Bill, the American
That's the
Families
catch.
Plan, or any of these? Because if they don't, and here's the big if they do, they would have to do it by either overpowering Republicans or diluting the bills to the point where they're not going to be what
Right
they say
there.
they are.
And
It's
that's
gonna
the
be
catch.
One of those two ways.
That's the
And
catch.
if they dilute them, then it's going to be unpopular.
Well,
And
first,
if they
do you
go
agree with what I
toe-to-toe
just said?
Republicans,
I want to make sure, because I want to start off on a
that's
point
their
of agreement
approach.
before we move.
that's their approach. You mean that
Yeah,
they're trying to
that's
sort
the
of
approach. That's what he's trying to articulate in the speech.
I think that's part of it.
Well, the second part
he doesn't
is,
want to address the.
will he do it? And if he's not going to do it, then this is the part that annoys me more than anything else. It's just words. You have the power to do it. Are you going to do it? And I don't think he is. I agree with you. He's either going to dilute it or they're just not going to get it done.
And either of those seem bad to me. I will be honest. I know that you're in favor of overpowering the Republicans, but I'm worried about the precedent that's going to set for the next president, who is probably going to be a Republican. Even if he's not, it's not like there's not going to be a Republican again in the future of American history. If what you're doing is widening what any party that's in power can do, then you're just going to it's going to be an inverted pendulum, where instead of slowing each time it moves from side to side, the rate of its agitation increases, and it's going to throw us off the ball in some serious, deep sense.
No.
If every administration, as the party moves into and out of power, as it's on the one hand the Democrats, on the other hand the Republicans, if they're working to undo what the previous party did and push the American government and the American people further in their direction, always fighting against what the other side did, that seems like where things have been headed for a while. I don't see how that's going to stop. If the bills and plans that Biden is planning, and that his administration, his office are planning, if they're diluted, that's not going to help that fundamental problem. And if they overpower the Republicans and get them through, that's going to make the problem worse. So I don't see how that trend is going to stop.
Okay,
and that's why I don't think that it's a good plan to try to overpower them. But we got to go into a break.
If that was the case, Social Security would have been gone. Medicare would have been gone. I know what you're saying. You're basically saying if our trend continues unabated, then this goes into chaos. But what if that trend, just like it was, let's say in the 40s and 50s or whatever else, what if it's not a direct proportional increase? What if it does have moments where it abates, moments where it deviates from the typical norm? Like, for example, in trying to attack Joe Biden here, what if the way to attack Joe Biden here is actually to move to the left for the Republican Party? Or to accept, hey, maybe jobs is the thing that we need to focus on. And Republicans have a different tact. Would that change the tenor? Yes. I mean, think of what Eisenhower was. Eisenhower.
Yeah, you can see some of that stuff with Trump too. You can see that with Trump moving, interestingly enough,
the foreign
to the left on economic.
Yeah. So what if Eisenhower?
Foreign policy.
Because Eisenhower's, yes, he was a militaristic president, but what if, him saying the New Deal is just the way of going from here on out? This is the policy from here on out, and if you don't like it, you can get out. What if there's a Republican equivalent of that, where they're like, and like you said, Trump, on some level, was that. He just was cowed by the whole Russiagate stuff. Like, what would Trump have been if it wasn't for the Russiagate stuff? I don't know. Would he have been more likely to get the troops out of the war zones? Yeah, probably. That stuff was used to cow him on that front. Would he have been more likely to?
I don't see him. No, I think that the Republicans in their own way are going to have to keep up some level of austerity. They're going to have to keep up some of the libertarian take.
Yes.
Even as Trump moves them to the left, he's doing that with tax cuts. It's not just an across-the-board increasing expenditure.
But if you think about it,
and we're not in the
Donald Trump talked about $10 an hour minimum wage. He mentioned that. Trump was talking about, meaning he increasing the minimum wage. He was talking about jobs and bringing jobs from overseas. Like, that stuff that a jobs president that a Republican can do. I don't believe for a moment that a Republican can't come up with an argument that allows them to either pass some kind of stimulus, even though the stimulus is probably going to be towards corporate interests, and some of that stuff is going to go towards other things. I don't believe that a Republican is barred out of it just from ideology. I don't. And I think they could frame an argument. I mean, even if, like, for example, what does it mean to be a Democrat today versus what does it mean to be a Democrat, let's say, in the 40s? Well, from an economic sense, those things are dramatically different. Even if you go back to Kennedy, it's dramatically different. So we do see that what it means to be something changes. So what happens if what it means if you're a Republican, in order to get in office and to compete outside of this kind of voter suppression stuff, that they actually try to compete, when they actually win the argument on things like immigration, that's something that Republicans beat Democrats on, and on things like, okay, we're going to have job creation, we're going to prevent these communities from falling in disrepute. They can do that. They can get the black vote on stuff like that.
I could very well see Trump specifically doing that, which is why I think that there's a higher chance than you seem to give it credit for that the next president is going to be a Republican. Whether or not Biden makes it through the next 3.5 years, et cetera, the next 4 years, effectively, we got to go into a break, though. We're going to be back with Carmine Sabia, continuing this conversation on our special coverage this morning of Biden's address to a joint session of Congress last night. Not a State of the Union. They don't do that on their first year of their first term. Anyway, you're listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. We will be back in a minute with Carmine Sabia. Be right back.
Fault Lines. We are above all the latest developments, and we don't take any sides. Radio Sputnik, telling the untold.
Are you bored? Are you lonely? Do you need a hug? Well, we can't give you that, but we can keep you up to date on Radio Sputnik.
Fault Lines.
Welcome back to Fault Lines on Radio Sputnik. My name is Jamarl Thomas. I'm joined by my co-host, Shane Stranahan, coming to you live out of our station in Washington, D.C. So we've just viewed Biden's not State of the Union address. Shane and I gave our ideas on that address. I think we had slightly deviating opinions on it, or at the very least I think Shane was a little darker on it than I was. I thought the politics of it was probably good, even though I didn't necessarily like some of the stuff that was in it. That said, to bring on someone else to give their take on this, we're joined by Carmine Sabia. He's writer and editor at large at thesabiareport.com. Carmine, how's it going? You doing all right?
Well, how are you?
We are doing all right. So we are talking about Joe Biden's speech. Now, I think I'm lighter on the speech than I think Shane is. I don't want to misrepresent. But I didn't think it was a bad speech. I thought some of the elements and what some of it means is monstrous at some level when you think about it. But in other parts, it's the question of, okay, how are you going to do what I think you're trying to accomplish if you're not willing to be more aggressive in getting it done? And if not, do you actually mean it? That's where my conflict comes in with this particular speech. What did you think about it? Did you think it was effective? Did you think it was ineffective? What were your thoughts?
Look, let's be honest, right? I'm not going to like it. Obviously, I'm a partisan. I don't make any bones about that. That being said, I went into that speech with an open mind. I said, look, I always like to go in with an open mind. I liked what he said about the power grid and fixing the power grid. That's about the end of what I liked about the speech. So I sit there and I listen to, essentially it sounded like he was sitting on Santa Claus's lap. I want a phone and I want a bike and I want a Red Ryder in this thing which tells time. Okay, so I mean, it was ridiculous. We're going to spend trillions of dollars, which, by the way, we're going to use it to buy American. We're going to force you to buy American, but don't worry, because here's what we're going to do. We're going to take tax money, and we're going to give it to you, union heads and unions. We're going to give this tax money to you so they could buy American. And then in turn, you unions, you're going to donate that money to Democrats. So really what we have going on here is a money laundering operation.
This is not a money laundering operation, Carmine. Come on. And the idea that he's giving this to unions, just because he's given a nod to the PRO Act. This is one of the things I dislike about the speech. It's a nod to the PRO Act. It's using it as a prop. He doesn't believe it for a moment. He's not. Do you honestly believe that Joe Biden is going to use his political clout to get through the PRO Act?
Yeah. Yeah, I do.
Why do you think that? He didn't do that with the $15 an hour minimum wage.
Because he can't. But he can do this.
Why do you think that?
That's different.
I guess that's what I'm getting at. Why do you think that?
I don't know. I'm not sure he can't, because apparently we can now do everything through reconciliation. Everything.
Yeah, but he wasn't willing to do that.
That has been the trend. But yeah, here's the other thing with unions. I mean, in a sort of abstract sense, I'm pro-union. But when it comes to, we were just having this conversation the other day. When it comes to the unions that we currently have operating in our country, they are territorial, self-serving, and weak. And I kind of like your argument there, Carmine. I don't know if I'd call it money laundering, but that's clearly, it's the reputation laundering or something like this. You set up this fruitful cycle, a virtuous cycle from your perspective, where you give handouts to the people that you want to support you. In some sense, it's just democracy as it currently stands.
How's that not money laundering?
I hear you. No, I hear you.
I don't think that's what's taking place.
But I would call it reputation laundering or something like that. I would just call it you're giving support to the people that you want to support you. And I think that in a weird way, it's kayfabe. The way that the unions are pushing back against the PRO Act, we didn't get it into this. Maybe not against the PRO Act, but against Biden for not passing the PRO Act. The way they were saying they wouldn't support him, they'd withhold their vote or whatever. It seems like that's a sort of half-hearted move to show to their progressive base, whatever there is left of it, that okay, they're willing to stand up to the man, and yet at the end of the day, they're going to push him as far as they can, and then they're going to do what they always do, which is support the Democrat. Because if they support the Republican, their friends are going to hate them. I mean, that just seems par for the course. And so it's almost like the support is granted. Now, whether the PRO Act would be good for America, in my opinion, is another question entirely. But I mean, Carmine, I'm curious, what's your take on unions in general, either historically or as they stand right now?
Did you say kayfabe?
I did.
I love it. Our lingo has made it into the modern vernacular. I was in wrestling for over 10 years, man. So that's cool to me. Well, I'm not a fan of unions. I'm a fan of when they started, but again, I'm an Italian kid from New Jersey. So a couple things. Number one, I know money laundering when I see it. And number two, I know what the unions are really about. I've seen it in my eyes. You know what I mean? When I was a kid, the unions were as corrupt as hell. I can't imagine they changed much. It still seems pretty corrupt. You got the teachers union holding teachers out of school for no reason at this point, other than their teachers want to work from home because it's easier. So,
well, and the same thing applies to that. I mean, I just want to come back. The same thing, it took us there. The same thing applies to the Democrats. Of course, they're corrupt as hell. They're self-serving. So are many Republicans too. But that's the state of our current system. I want to pivot here. Did Biden's speech leave you feeling optimistic, Carmine?
Yes. Yeah, I'm pretty optimistic that we're going to be in a Great Depression by year 3.
Why do you think we're going to be in a Great Depression around here? Let me ask you this: what of Biden's speech left you with that appraisal? Like, be specific. When you heard the speech and you thought, man, these 3 items is the thing that's going to give me to the Great Depression. Because look, I can't attack you for the thought of we're going to be in a Great Depression. Whatever people think is what they think, right? It's when it gets to physical matter, objective reality. So, what are the items of that speech that left you with that grave impression?
Yeah, I don't think we're actually going to be in a Great Depression. I'm being hyperbolic, but hyperbolic rather. But let me say this: I all I hear is, and you get a car, and you get a car, and you get a car, and you get a car. We're going to give all this free stuff away. Listen, we're going to give you free preschool and free college. We're going to keep your kids in school as long as possible so we can indoctrinate them to our nonsense.
Well, wait a minute. He's just talking about public education, like preschool. So you're against preschool? Is that what I'm getting?
Against preschool. Pay for it.
Why are you against preschool?
What?
Why are you against preschool?
Whoa, I didn't say I was against preschool. I went to preschool. My mom paid for me to go to preschool.
I know, but you're basically going after Biden, saying we're trying to indoctrinate your kid as long as possible. Joe Biden is not setting the curriculum for the schools.
Bro, come on. They know what they're doing. They know what's being taught in the schools. And we're going to keep your kids in schools as long as possible, and we're going to foot the bill for it.
Well, that's why I said, that's what I asked you. Are you against preschools? Oh, so I see. You're against preschools if the state pays for it. You're not against preschools if people pay for it.
I'm kind of against preschools in general. I think it's ridiculous that your kids are in school that long.
Okay, there we are. So when I asked you that before and you said, no, I went to preschool, that's not really true then. You are against preschools.
My mom pulled me out, but it was, may she rest in peace. But it was like, here's the thing: you have to have free schools now because after the Democrats pushed the whole women should work, and that became women have to work. Women are not doing the most important job they should be doing, which is raising the next generation.
Well, come on. I mean, the reason that women had to work is because there wasn't enough money. Like, people weren't making enough at that point after, deindustrialization of the United States and some of these policies, either free trade bills, all of the stuff. Well, people both had to work. And if both didn't work, you had a situation where they couldn't afford to get a house, et cetera, et cetera. It wasn't, you could say the Democrats forced this. I would say the society itself forced it, especially during the war. Like, that's what I mean. This is not a Democrat thing. We went to war. The men went off to war. The women got further into the workplace. After the women got further into the workplace, they didn't necessarily want to be stuck at home after being in the workplace. I don't, like, how are you blaming Democrats for this?
Bro, you're talking about World War II.
Yes.
Men came back and worked for 3 more decades after that with women in the home.
Yeah, I know, but the impact of it went forward. That's the point I'm making.
You think about it. Well, okay, but that's, again, it's a delayed impact. The shift that you're talking, you just brought up the industrialization. You just brought up, I mean, we also talk about long-run wage stagnation in America, and we've talked on the show before about how it used to be that one income could support a family, then it took 2 incomes, then it took going into, using credit cards, then it took going into debt, and we're now stuck in this sort of deep debt era. We're living in that. And so I don't even, from the gender relations thing, I have a laissez-faire policy. Let them figure it out for themselves. I don't care. I'm broadly a liberal guy when it comes to social policies, but the history there seems undeniable. It doesn't seem like right after World War II, there was a full 50-50 participation in the workplace. There's not that thing. And I'm just putting my side in here too. With preschool, I am also proudly opposed, but hey, that applies to a lot of the school system in general. I'm more of an anti-school guy than most that we have on this show. Probably closer to Carmine's side on that thing. People are in schools for a bit too long. And it does seem, if you're going to say that, okay, which side of the political spectrum is determining the kinds of lessons, the kinds of mores, kinds of moral codes that people are taught in schools? Is it the right or is it the left? I'm pretty sure that you're going to say different things, but I would say it's the left.
I don't know what it means to be in school too long. How do you evaluate that? How do you evaluate that? You're basically saying, my personal opinion is this, which is fine. But let's just be clear, that's your personal opinion. I don't know what it means to be these people are in school too long. I don't know what that means. What I do know is from the standpoint of... We could get into an extended debate about it, but... Say that again?
It's off topic. I said we could get into an extended debate about it, but that's off topic. Broadly, school, again, I don't want to get too deep into it, but school should either edify you, it should improve your morality and your sense of humanity and your knowledge of civilization, your knowledge of history, that kind of thing, and or it should train you to get a job. And a lot of people, specifically in college, but the earlier it starts and the longer it goes, it's part of this long drawn-out process where people are industrialized. They're taught to behave in a certain way. They're not edified, and in a lot of these cases, they're not actually taught to work any meaningful job. It's some weird mishmash of the two, from preschool up to college and post-grad, wherever people go with this stuff. Again, it might be a matter of opinion, but we've had this conversation before,
but you
Jamarl.
Just said that schools should teach moral codes, and then you're complaining that they're teaching moral codes. You can't have it both ways.
True. But here's the thing: if it were the Republicans that were setting the standard,
well, and by the way, I don't even accept that it's the Democrats setting the standard in regards to education. I don't accept that at all. Especially if you're talking about like world history and that type of stuff. That stuff goes with an American perspective. It's not a Democrat setting the agenda on this stuff.
What do you mean by an American perspective?
For example, if we're talking about slavery, if we're talking about slavery in the history books, I've had history books that had people, slaves, just laying on the ship, lounging, as if this was like this kind of process. Or it would talk about the war, for example, the Second World War, as if this kind of Americans won that war. And it would deprioritize the other people who were involved in that war. It's an American perspective. It's not so much a Democrat or Republican perspective. I mean, you've had history books that were in Texas that were viciously right-wing. So I don't buy Democrats are setting the education agenda in the country. I don't buy that. I need something more than just your guys' words on that one.
All right. Carmine, we got to go to a break, but real quick, what's your take?
I mean, I think that the whole thing is ridiculous. Obviously, the Democrats are setting the agenda in schools. They want to keep you there as long as possible, not to learn how to do a job like Shane is talking about, but to learn how to be indoctrinated, to learn how to think right. You have to have correct think, because wrong think can get you in trouble these days.
Real quick, Carmine, let's get to the job thing for a moment. Why do you want kids programmed to do a job in school? You don't want kids to get this kind of just general, well-rounded education to figure out what they want to do. Meaning, at 15 years old, how do you know what you want to do in life unless you've been exposed to the elements of life?
I don't want you to pick it at 15, but by the time you get to college, you should have an idea. I'm not paying for 2 years. You want me to pay for 2 years of you going to parties and hanging out with your friends and finding yourself? Get the hell out of here, bro.
Yes, I do. Yes, if that's where you want to put it. If you want to put it on the extreme of what people are going to do with the 2-year education, yes.
That is not the extreme, man. That is not the extreme. That's the standard. I don't know what you're talking about.
I don't think that's the standard for a 2-year education.
During their early years of college.
I don't buy that. In a 4-year college, yes. In a 4-year college, absolutely. In a 2-year college, by the way, that's not still, you're not living on campus.
But here's
in
a lot of people who go to 2-year college
program.
are significantly older. If you look at the demographics of who goes to community college versus a 4-year college, the very thing about specifically community college is plenty of adults go and do that because they've gone into the workforce. They decided at a certain point that they want to repivot.
Yes.
You know, they want to pivot. They want to reposition. They want to get into a new career, and they go back to school.
So you're making my point.
And at that point, frankly, they can afford it. Arguably, in a lot of these cases, they have built up enough money. They've been saving for their jobs.
Why do you think that? Why do you
because
think
I know a lot of people who've done it.
I get
what are you talking about?
I get that you individually know a lot of people who done it. When I went to community college, I couldn't afford it. Why do you think that? That's just such a weird thing to think. 42% of the public make $18,000 a year. I strongly suggest to you that the people who are going back to community college are those people. I strongly suggest to you. They're trying to better their lot in life. And they go to community college as a way of doing it. That's why I don't buy this stuff that, oh, these guys are just doing drugs and hanging out. If you're talking about a 4-year college, yes. If you're talking about Longwood, yes. If you're talking about J. Sargent Reynolds, I don't buy that. I don't buy that.
Carmine, I don't want to leave you out of the conversation. Jamarl and I have been going back and forth quite a bit. What's your take here?
Interviewing each other here.
Wait, what was that?
I said you guys are interviewing each other here, but it's the 13th and 14th grade, man. I've been to community college for like 2 weeks. It was ridiculous. It was stupid. I'm not going to pay for 2 more years of you getting to be a kid and not get your life together. I'm not doing it, and I think it's bull.
I became a software engineer because of that 2-year in college. Software engineer, literally. My 2 years in college got me to the point where I realized, all right, I need to find something. Because this is what happened to me. I'll give you my tact of what happened with me. I went initially to Longwood, and this is immediately after getting ill. And I think the first 2 years, or the first year, was pot, hanging out, and getting a feel for what I didn't want to do from the standpoint of going to pre-med. And after several years, I think it was like 27, 28, I went back to J. Sargent Reynolds. I ended up going back to ECPI. I ended up getting my associates. At the exact same time, I ended up getting a certificate in software engineering, comp sci. It's not just this thing. I mean, look, I look at this stuff as all of us are in this society collectively. All of us. No way out. And I look at it and say, okay, what are the things that we can do to improve our lot in this world, but also to one another? And is education a part of that process? Yes. And as a conservative, and as many conservatives, I can exactly see the argument that conservatives will make. It says, look, we want people to pull themselves up by their own bootstraps. We want to give people this ability to be independent and free of the government yoke, et cetera, et cetera. Great. You got to give those people a chance. You got to give those people a running start. And one of the ways to do that, especially if we can make the argument that public education is important and having this kind of competitive thing in education and everything else, 2 years falls into that. It just does. I don't know the argument against saying, hey, let's try to give these people, because if it was up to me, I would say 4 years. But you would say, well, look, those guys are out there partying and whatnot at that 4-year college. I would say 2 years is very specific into getting jobs, into people saying, okay, what do we want to do as a career? If you want to say that a 4-year education doesn't do that, I would say a 2-year education is specific, just like Shane said. Many of those people go after they've been in the market for a while and they realize they want to do something else. I just don't think it's superfluous. I actually think those colleges do give you a pivot point, either in changing your career or going into another career. And I don't see how that's bad, considering that that's additional tax revenue, that's higher wages. Those people may start businesses. It's a positive. It's a net positive for our society. Carmine?
I disagree. I couldn't disagree with you more. Listen, if you're making $18,000 a year, number one, go get a trade, find a better job. Number one. Number two, you have bigger problems at community college. Number two, you say you got a degree in software engineering and made you a software engineer. What software engineering are you doing today?
I did it for 10 years. Just because I've changed careers, I mean, I don't see how that's a hit against software engineering. I did software engineering for 10 years. I can give you all of the systems I've built, and what you would probably agree with, I even built systems to get rid of people's jobs. I even did that. I made the company more efficient. I guess my point is, if I did that for 10 years, and I'm working in the industry for 10 years, and my salary increased, all of those things improved, able to buy a house, able to get a car, all of those things are contributing to the economy, full stop, like across the board. I stopped doing software engineering. That's fair enough. But what does that matter? I went into a different job that's equal and equivalent to what I was making in software. So it's like that's still.
Where were you going with that? Why were you asking?
Because I was going to finish my point, which was, even though you're not doing software engineering today because you found a better career, which college didn't prepare you for. Number one. Number two, you didn't have to go to community college to be a software engineer. You could have went to a software engineering school, finished it in 6 months. So,
actually, I did go to software engineering school also, but just pointing it out.
Have to go to community college and learn liberal arts and learn all this bull that has nothing to do with your degree. And it's a waste of time. It's a waste of money. If they said, we'll pay for you to go learn a trade, you don't have to learn all this other bull crap. You're going to go to learn a trade, and you're going to come out with a job. I would be okay with actually the government paying for that. But I know too many people personally, and I'm sure the stats would probably back me up. I didn't have a chance to look it up before I came on the show, that most people who go to two-year college don't do anything with that two-year college, bro. I saw these people. They're zombies. They come out and they're working minimum wage jobs. It takes 2 more years right now of your parents' money to spend and be a kid and not have to be an adult, not have to face the world. And that's all it really amounts to for most people. Yes, there are exceptions to the rule, of course. But I don't think that's the norm. I don't. I would be interested to see stats that prove that incorrect, but I don't believe that's the norm.
Same. I mean, just brief story on my end. I tested out of school when I was 14 after briefly attending public school. I took a semester or two at a community college down in Pasadena, California when I was 15. Maybe it was the classes I was in, or maybe it was the school that I was attending. But it was pretty much what you described. A lot of folks who are just, pretty young, kind of screwing around, trying to get a sense of things. It's easier to get into clearly than a 4-year college, and it's less expensive, and there's less of a commitment, frankly. And so, I was taking classes on Western philosophy, comedy and English literature, speaking, those kinds of things. I had mostly young crowd. And from what I remember, a lot of folks were doing it because they were interested in it, not because they were planning on making $80K a year, $60K a year, $100K a year from it or whatever. It's not like they were trying to significantly step up the career ladder. It sounds like you have a slightly modified point here. It sounds like what you're saying is you're cool with Carmine, you're okay with people, you're okay with the government funding education if it's going to be productive education.
Correct.
Is that right?
Correct, because then it would contribute to the economy.
Yeah, I can agree with that. And frankly, I think that there is a need for more of that. I think that it's weird how bloated, and this is, again, we're on a tangent. We're talking originally about Biden's address, and we moved on to this. But and we've only got a couple minutes left with you. But it's weird how bloated our colleges have gotten. And it's weird how it is now seen as a prerequisite sort of. It's like a prestige gig that you go to that costs you money instead of gives you money. You end up partying a lot of the time. And then ideally, at the end of the period of your tenure, the period of your attendance, you come out with a degree that might, in some cases, make you more money as you move into a job. And you don't even, you often, as you're applying for jobs, whether it's a social sciences degree, whatever it's in, unless you're going to that college to get into a specific career field, it's just sort of a prestigious thing that you can put on your resume that shows employers that you had the willpower to stick through years of probably boring classes and do the homework and complete the stuff. It seems like that's what we're left with. Again, though, we've only got about 2 minutes left with you, man. We got stuck on this tangent. That's on our end.
Well, I think it's so that everybody comes out of there. How many college-educated people are voting Democrat? That's not a coincidence.
Look, if you are really going to take shots at people getting an education, that is wild. And that's for both of you. I think that is ludicrous. The idea that you come away with the idea that you're going to argue that college is a prestige gig as opposed to, actual college and education, I think that's ludicrous. I think that's ridiculous on its face. I'm sorry.
It's not 1960.
I don't care. I don't care. In fact, it makes it more relevant that it's not 1960. Do you not see
problems?
It's more relevant.
Do you not see problems with our education system?
It's more relevant. It is more relevant with the fact that it's not 1960. The rate and the pace of knowledge around the world requires some edifice, some device that allows people to be able to participate in that. And that's college.
I think that is in any way reflected.
Is there a leaky bucket
in modern education?
Is there a leaky bucket?
You're talking about the rate of change
yes,
of knowledge.
There is a leaky bucket. Despite the fact that there is a leaky bucket, you still have a situation of people going to school to better themselves. And again, I didn't go to school for a prestige gig. I went to get an education and figure out what that I want to do and get a job and everything else. And I guarantee you, the majority of the people who are going to school are not doing all of that work just for prestige of it all. I mean, I think that's ludicrous. But go for it. You guys hate education for some reason. And I don't quite get this animosity against education and against people getting degrees. Yes.
30.
So let's do this. Let's take a break. Carmine, I want to thank you for coming on, man. It's good back and forth. Good back and forth. Carmine Sabia is writer and editor at large at thesabiareport.com. You can follow Carmine on Twitter at Carmine Sabia. Watch the Carmine Sabia show by going on SabiaReport.com and subscribe to his feed on Rothkin.com/SabiaReport. You guys are listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. We will be back in a moment.
Listening to Radio Sputnik. Telling the untold.
Fault Lines.
Live from across the divided states of America, it is now time for the last hour this morning of the most disruptive show in American politics, covering news, politics, and events from across these disunited states and the surface of our increasingly divided globe. In the independent corner, I am your political analyst, Shane Stranahan. And Jamarl, I think your mic may be muted.
I'm sorry. And in the left corner, I am the indefatigable, the ever-vigilant, the last man on the wall, your political analyst, Jamarl Thomas.
And together we are Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. All right, folks, if you joined us fairly recently, you wouldn't know it, but today is a special edition of Fault Lines. We played Biden's address to a joint session of Congress, not his State of the Union, but it kind of fills the same role, even though it's belated. It's months after when most presidents would have given theirs. Anyway, we played his address in full earlier on during the show this morning. And starting in the last hour, we started to bring on guests. We spoke with Carmine Sabia from 8:30 to 9. He started talking about Biden's address. And fairly quickly, after about the first 10, 15 minutes, we got into a long conversation about the value of modern American education, the role it plays in society, that whole thing. Anyway, you can go back and check that out. Later on this hour, we're planning on speaking with Margaret Kimberly and Kim Iverson. An interesting panel, to say the least. Again, going over some of the details from Biden's address to Congress, how it went, whether it served its purpose, whether it left them optimistic, how they think the American public will respond to it, what we can infer about the mind of Biden and the activities of Biden's staff, his administration staff, from this speech. We'll be getting into that more again later this hour with Margaret Kimberly and Kim Iverson. But without further ado, we have headlines. Let's get into them. In COVID news, at least 54,520 new COVID cases were reported in the United States yesterday, with 950 new deaths. Over the past week, there has been an average of 52,605 cases per day. That is a decrease of 26% from the average 2 weeks earlier. 30% of the American public has been fully vaccinated now, up from 29% yesterday, and 43% of residents have received at least one dose. As of this morning, in the United States, the coronavirus has infected more than 32,257,600 people and killed about 574,000, just under that, 573,951. The country of India continues to battle a deepening COVID crisis with more than 300,000 new coronavirus infections every day over the past week. Overall, the country has documented more than 17.9 million cases of COVID-19. Prime Minister Narendra Modi has been widely criticized, with the vice presidents of the Indian Medical Association calling him a super spreader for his behavior at political rallies and for allowing a religious festival to take place in northern India. More than 40 countries, meanwhile, have been giving India supplies, with the United States, Germany, the United Kingdom, Italy, and Russia delivering oxygen concentrators, medicine, monitors, and ventilators this week. And we had a great conversation, by the way, with Shaban Saxena yesterday. We were talking about this. India produced, at one point, 60% of the vaccines in the world. And it was also a major world hub, the major world hub for manufacturing oxygen concentrators. And now India is in short supply of both oxygen concentrators and vaccines. They were producing them for the sake of other nations, and they didn't produce enough for domestic use. And then what Shaban told us was, just giving you sort of context, background on this stuff, a couple of months ago, the Indian government lifted lockdowns. Now, this was in anticipation, preparation for elections, state elections taking place across India in March and in April, some of which have happened, some of which are yet to happen. Anyway, India lifted lockdowns to try to sort of, mollify the mood of the public, bring up the spirits of the public, and make the elections go better for them. And that has backfired tremendously, where now India is seeing its steepest, sharpest second wave. It is not looking good, and the condition just seems to be getting worse. Hospitals have been overfull, at capacity and over capacity for days now, and there are no signs that that is changing. It just seems like it's getting worse. And if you remember from early on in the pandemic, the whole conversation about flattening the curve, basically keeping the rate of infection low enough that hospitals around the world, but specifically in the United States and Europe, they don't get over capacity, so that the death rate stays low. Because when people, have to go to the hospital, it's gotten pretty serious. And if they can't go to the hospital and get treatment there, if they can't get medicine, if they can't be put on ventilators, the mortality rate of this disease would go way, way, way up. And I'm worried, and I'm predicting at this point that we are going to see that happen in India, where hospitals have been strained past their limits for days now. It seems like the government, from what Shaban said, appears to be on the verge of collapse. It is a terrible situation. Anyway, go back and check out that great interview with Shaban Saxena yesterday. That was 7:30 a.m. Eastern yesterday morning. In national political news, President Biden set out a $1.8 trillion spending plan titled the American Families Plan in his first speech to Congress last night. He also focused on America's victory over the coronavirus, saying that, quote, America is on the move again, end quote. He also played up significantly the United States competition with China, stressing his administration's plans to invest a lot of money into R&D, saying that basically we should come up with a sort of advanced R&D projects in the field of biotech. And again, just generally painting the situation in the United States as one of competing with China, this other rising superpower. The speech was not called the State of the Union due to its being in the first months of the president's first term, and was instead called an address before a joint session of the Congress. That's a practice dating back to Ronald Reagan. The speech also came months after most presidents address Congress and the nation for the first time upon entering the White House, which they usually do in January or February of their first year in the office. The chamber was mostly empty, with only 200 members of Congress and other officials invited instead of the usual 1,600. It's about 1/8 capacity. All of those attending wore masks and sat at least 6 feet apart. Now, normally this would be a huge event, and so we'd be talking about it in headlines, but we have the whole show dedicated to talking about it. So I'm just going to move right on to other headlines. We'll be coming back to this next one in the future. In a widely publicized response to Biden, Senator Tim Scott of South Carolina said that the handling of the coronavirus began last year under President Trump, and also said that America is not racist, despite being the historical recipient of discrimination himself, the historical victim of discrimination. We will be playing clips from his speech later on in our conversation with Margaret Kimberly and Kim Iverson. Former New York City mayor and the previous personal lawyer of President Trump, Rudy Giuliani, had his office and apartment raided allegedly over suspected connections to Ukraine. His son, Andrew Giuliani, called the raids, quote unquote, disgusting, and spoke of the, quote, continued politicization of the Justice Department, end quote, saying that, quote, if this can happen to the former president's lawyer, this can happen to any American, end quote. Now, this is a big deal, and I would say that I agree with Andrew Giuliani on this one. I also find this disgusting. I also see it as the results of continued politicization of the Justice Department, and he's right. If this can happen to the former president's lawyer, this can happen to any American. I see this as a sort of political retaliation. In some case, characteristic of some of the more autocratic governments of countries around the world, when one power comes into the position of supremacy, the other power goes out, the new one tries to uproot the previous one. It's a form of political retaliation, pushing back against things they didn't like about the previous government. Jamarl, that's how I see it. How do you see it?
I mean, the Rudy Giuliani thing, I have to be honest, I don't know enough about it. Like, the Roger Stone thing bothered me a lot more, because to me that was like a direct politicization of the Justice Department, like clear and unequivocal. And I know Democrats cheered that, but it's like, you're cheering that Russiagate was bogus, because that's what locking up Roger Stone means. And on top of that, you descended on his house like a compound. And you didn't do that to Brennan when he lied to Congress. You didn't do that to Clapper when he lied to Congress. You did that to Stone because of his relationship with Donald Trump. Let's be honest. The Giuliani thing, that could be this also. Whereas they were chomping at the bit to find out a way to put a knife in Giuliani. That could be this. But I have to be honest, I don't know enough about it to know on the overt if that's true. By the same token, they've shown a pattern of doing it, so I can't discount it. So yeah, you could be right. I mean, it just looks like it's retribution for being part of the Trump administration. That's what it looks like on its face. So we'll see. I need to see more into it.
It is putting the Russiagate story on a ventilator. Yeah. It is trying to artificially prolong the life of the Russiagate narrative. And this, of course, again, ties back to the first attempted impeachment of Donald Trump over his conversation with Vladimir Zelensky, the president of Ukraine, ties back into that. And it's sort of par for the course. Of course, it's happening under Biden. But I see it, again, I see it as a form of retaliation, but also a way to sort of sustain that story, to keep that story alive, and to try to get whatever they can out of that story before too much time has passed. And it would feel like they're trying to, dig up a grave or exhume something that had been already completely debunked. Anyway, in international news, China's foreign ministry has already hit back against President Biden on his focus on competition with the Chinese government. China said of the relationship between China and the United States that, quote, this kind of competition should be a track and field race, not a duel to the death, end quote. This comes as a spokesperson for China's defense ministry said that activities by U.S. military ships and surveillance planes directed at China have increased significantly under President Biden. And Jamarl, I want to go to you again on this one. It's very interesting to me because the Democrats, if you remember, were constantly criticizing Trump for his trade war with China. Maybe it was just the way that he did it, the fact that it was an economic measure instead of an outright military one. And maybe I'm misremembering. But don't you remember him being the recipient of so much scorn from MSNBC, CNN,
yes,
the New York Times, those types of outlets, specifically over that move? And yet Biden is doing it out in the open. He made that the subject of his first address to Congress last night. And they seem pretty pacific about it. They seem pretty okay with it.
It's aggravating, isn't it? It's very aggravating. Like, Biden says, we're going to take us out of Afghanistan. And people are like, all right, okay, fair enough. We'll accept that. Trump says, it's like, oh my God, I can't believe he's doing this. He's doing this because of Vladimir Putin. Like that nonsense, right? The same difference. And I kept making the point that says, that said the United States and its tenor towards China didn't start with Trump. It started with Obama also. I mean, the pivot towards Asia, it was that. The Trans-Pacific
Yes.
Partnership, it
Yes.
was that. All of these things were there in order to kind of cow China with the recognition that, whoa, this horse is almost out the barn. We need to stop it. Donald Trump's provocative actions, though, didn't make that better. They made that worse on some level in a weird way. And Biden is not making that better. What Biden did, though, what Biden recognizes is what Obama recognized in the sense that, whoa, we need to do something about this. We're going to lose the thread. These guys are investing trillions into technology and in relationships around the globe. We need to win the 21st century. This is no longer a unipolar world. It's that. That's what the speech was. Now, China, as I keep mentioning, looks at this in win-win perspective. We don't. We don't. I keep saying that, and that's why I keep asking, is China changing its tenor in regards to world politics? If I look at the world as I need to win this, regardless, everything else is subordinate to me winning this, and you're looking at the world as, hey, maybe we can forge win-win relationships, you're going to lose. And is China's perspective of this, is it changing? I'm curious, like that China's response and Joe Biden's speech is the crux of the divide in the world right now. And I don't know who wins that. Does that make sense? Because I think you would say the win-win should win it. I would say the person who's scorched earth is more likely to win it.
It's pretty funny to me because you've gone meta, Jamarl. Instead of talking about who's going to win the race, we're talking about what type of competition is going to win out. It's just one step up. Anyway,
because I think that's phenomenal. You don't think that's significant? Like, this is not.
Of course.
This is like,
dude, don't say that.
Yes, I'm not saying you do. I'm asking. That wasn't a statement. It was a question.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, I wasn't trying to put a knife in you. I was just asking, the question of like.
It is. No, it is phenomenal, and I think that the win-win will win out because it is. There's a book, James P. Carr's Finite and Infinite Games. It has effectively to do exactly with this. Whether the games that you're playing, the games that our society, our world, maybe even our reality are run on, whether they are mutually beneficial or whether at some point they get destructive. And in an almost evolutionary sense, the games that are mutually beneficial win out over time because they keep living and eventually the others die. And I think that same take applies here. It was only back in 2012 that the term Thucydides trap was even coined. This idea that, when you have a rising power that's threatening to dethrone the currently reigning power, what happens is the reigning power, the big dog, in this case the United States, starts a backlash and tries to keep the other power down, and in that process it either accelerates their own demise or just generally leads to a cataclysm. We now have a term, we have a handle for that idea, and I hope and I think that we will use that idea to sort of caution ourselves and keep that from actually happening.
No, buddy.
If it is a track and field race, if it's something where we can each improve ourselves through that competition, by, almost in the way that we did with the space race, right? It seemed like we were going to, who would be the first person to put who would be the first country to put a man on the moon? If we can use that competition to embolden ourselves and to enable the human spirit to act at its highest levels, that would be a good thing. And I think that kind of approach wins out over the long run. I hear you being more cynical.
Oh, no, buddy. I feel your hope in this. I am not that hopeful on this. Like, this is like our world context is shaped by the Thucydides trap stuff. Like, think back to the First World War. You have Serbia as an upcoming power. You have the Austro-Hungarian Empire that wants to teach it a lesson. It gets the opportunity to do it after Archduke Ferdinand is killed, where at that point they start putting all of these measures to Serbia, knowing that there is no way that Serbia can fulfill those measures because it breaches this notion of sovereignty. But they did that for the very specific reason of trying to keep that country down. Thucydides trap. They were trying to undercut an upcoming power. Well, what about China right now in the U.S.? The U.S. considers this existential. And I think that's the catch. Meaning, like, we don't look at this as like a space race. We could lose the space race, even though we weren't, we're considered this is not something we're going to lose. The situation with China is where the U.S. becomes a subordinate factor in the world. And for the U.S.'s standpoint, I don't think it considers that as being a world that it would accept. That scares me. So I feel you. And maybe you're right that in the long run, this notion of cooperation wins out. Well, what does it mean for a long run? And is that 50 years, 20 years, or 200? Does that make sense? Like, yeah, I feel you. Maybe you're right, and I hope you're right. Cooperation, winning out over this notion of eating each other to the death. Let's do this. Let's take us out. Those are your headlines. You guys are listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. We're going to be back with Tim Iverson and Margaret Kimberly for a great panel discussion on Joe Biden's speech. Back in a moment.
Fault Lines. 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. We give you the most essential information out there. Radio Sputnik, telling the untold.
Feeling kind of blue, but maybe also kind of red, and kind of purple, and kind of alone? You've got a friend on Radio Sputnik. Tune into Political Misfits from 12 to 2 Eastern Time, Monday through Friday, for news, politics, and culture without the two-party bias. Catch us daily on 105.5 in Washington, D.C., or 102.9 or 104.7 in Kansas City. Or find us on Twitter, Facebook, YouTube, Spotify, or wherever you get your news.
Fault Lines.
Welcome back to Fault Lines on Radio Sputnik. My name is Jamarl Thomas. I'm joined by my co-host Shane Stranahan, coming to you live out of our station in Washington, D.C., 105.5 FM. If you guys live in the area, you can catch us on radio at 105.5 FM. Don't ad-lib in a moment. 105.5 FM at 1390 AM. We're also in Kansas City at 102.9 FM and 104.7 FM. If you guys are digging what Shane and I are putting down, whatever platform you're consuming this content on, give us a like and share that audio or video. If you want to join in on the conversation, you can do so with a chat, a tweet, and of course, you can reach us by phone at 202-521-1320. That is 202-521-1320. Your engagement helps make this show what it is, so definitely don't be shy. Well, we've just listened in full to Joe Biden's State of the Union speech. I'm putting an exclamation point behind it just because that's a not symbol in software. It was a not State of the Union speech. As Shane mentions, that apparently they don't do this in the first 100 days, going back to Ronald Reagan. Frankly, I don't know why they don't. Within 100 days, you at the very least have an appraisal of where the state of the nation is, even if it's coming from the previous administration. But that's a moot point. They don't do it that way. By the same token, there was still this kind of pomp and circumstance. You still had the president talking to both sides of Congress. And Joe Biden gave a speech that I thought would be received quite well by the nation, even though I have certain criticisms of that speech and other things that was in that speech and certain things that I think Joe Biden is using as props without the capability or even the real drive to actually get accomplished. I did think that some of the elements of the speech was quite good, even with those contradictions that are part of it. In order to have a conversation about this, we're joined with Margaret Kimberly and we're joined with Kim Iverson. We're going to have somewhat of a panel discussion on this. And we want to get their takes on it. Margaret Kimberly is a senior columnist and editor for the Black Agenda Report and author of Prejudicial, Black America and the Presidents. And Kim Iverson is an independent journalist and host of the Kim Iverson Show on YouTube and Rofkin. Welcome to the show, guys. How are both of you doing? Let's start with you, Kimberly. How are you doing today? Margaret?
You mean me, Margaret? Yes.
Oh,
hi, I'm
there you are.
good to be here.
No, you're fine. You're fine. We have two people, so we're working it this way. How are you doing today? You doing all right?
I am. I'm fine. Thank you.
So what did you think about this speech? Here, just a basic summary of appraisal before we step into it.
Well, I'm the wrong, I hate that speech, basically, the State of the Union, joint session of Congress, whatever it is. I really can't stand it. It's an overly long laundry list of mostly platitudes and some policy thrown in. And I'm not a Biden fan, so if being literal, how did I like the speech? I didn't. But as far as the content of the speech, it's a good thing to me when the government spends money. I think that is what we ought to be doing, and we need to reject this idea from the last 40 years that big government is bad. Big government is a necessity, but he's still tinkering around the edges. This claim, for example, that child poverty has been cut in half, first of all, is just not true. Some of these measures are temporary from the stimulus. It was said that child poverty could be cut in half. First of all, if the minimum wage went up, which it didn't, that should be a huge priority for him. But I think the big donors don't want it. They
right there.
Don't want people to have these demands.
Right there. Not just the $15 minimum wage, the PRO Act. And when he threw the PRO Act in with the $15, I was like, he doesn't mean it. He's not going to do it. He had the capacity to get $15 an hour over the finish line. Yeah, this is a pet peeve of mine. This is a trigger point, right? My mom worked her entire career without making $15 an hour. All of those years in poverty, whereas if she would have made 15, that would have been dramatically different in regards to raising me and for her mental health, all of that stuff. And so, we're talking about like 20, 30 million people. They threw off the edge, getting elected on this point, getting elected on it, and then didn't fulfill it. Kim, what did you think about the speech?
Yeah, I agree a lot with Margaret on it. These speeches are just it is just a bunch of platitudes to kind of get people to say, wow, this is a good person. He's going to do good things for the country. But ultimately, he doesn't really have power to do anything that he said last night, except for some of the foreign policy points, right? And he glossed over foreign policy, really didn't talk much about it. So other than saying that he was going to bully a little bit Putin and come down hard on China or North Korea or Iran or things like, and the nuclear deals there, other than that, all of it was just a list of stuff that Biden, I do believe, would actually like to get done. But getting Congress to actually do anything requires an act of God at this point in this country.
And so, or a stronger act of Biden, or some serious pushback that it seems. And the way that I see this is, these are not his policies. He might approve of them, but these were not written. The ideas for them were not generated by him. He's sort of acting at the behest of his staff willingly, but this isn't in his character. And what's also not in his character, it seems, is hardball politics with people on the other side of the aisle, hardball politics with Republicans, where he's willing to talk it up to a certain point, but not actually, when push comes to shove, actually either push or shove on these things. So what's the point? Why does he make, whether it's the $15 hour minimum wage, whether it's the American Families Plan or the infrastructure bill, if it's going to be reconciled and diluted to the point where, in a lot of these cases, it's probably not going to be recognizable, why is he doing it? Margaret, I'll start with you and then we can go to Kim. Margaret, what's your take?
Well, he's doing it it's window dressing. It gives the appearance that something is changing when it isn't. And also, it's unfortunately, he can get away with this and other things because people are still in this post-Trumpian trauma. And anything that differs from Trump, people can seize on and breathe a sigh of relief. And it keeps people from having to take any action. They can convince themselves that there's been a lot of change when there hasn't been. And frankly, he just lied about the $15 an hour minimum wage and then made up this story about the Senate parliamentarian wouldn't let him do it. And by the way, his proposal was that he claimed to be backing during the campaign was $15 an hour over 5 years. 15 is too little now. It should be $25 an hour right now. So even those little crumbs of raising it a little bit over time was rejected. It was too much for the people who he told nothing would fundamentally change, because that would be a fundamental change.
And Kim, what's your take?
Well, if you actually read the speech rather than just listen to Joe Biden give it, it actually is a really well-written speech. And I think the point of the speech is meant to, in times like these when the country is suffering because of a variety of reasons, but the pandemic mostly, it's meant to instill hope and get the people excited and sort of riled up. And it's also meant to get people to back the ideas. The problem is Joe Biden doesn't deliver in a way, he's not charismatic enough or aggressive enough or forceful enough in his mannerisms to actually deliver the speech in a way that would actually convince a bunch of Republicans that this is absolutely the path forward. But when you actually read the context or the actual content of the speech, I think that it is filled with things that even Republicans would have a difficult time saying,
Yeah.
no, we don't need that or we don't want that.
Agreed.
But he just didn't deliver it very well. But I think the point is to try to gain a bunch of support. But, his delivery is just so bad. There's just no way to get – people just were like dozing off during the speech like he was almost halfway through.
Yeah, I listened to it twice, right? And I agree with you, Kim. It's like if Biden delivered the speech with a certain degree of forcefulness and there was this real belief that he believed this, like flesh to bone believed this, and he was going to do whatever is necessary to get the stuff done, then this is a different speech and the acceptance of it is different. That it comes across with a certain degree of meaning. Let's play the clip for a moment. Put the PRO Act on my desk. I want to hear this. Let's play this clip, Andre.
Something I've always said in this chamber and the other. Good guys and women on Wall Street, but Wall Street didn't build this country. The middle class built the country, and unions built the middle class. So that's why I'm calling on Congress to pass Protect the Right to Organize Act, the PRO Act, and send it to my desk so we can support the right to unionize. And by the way, while you're thinking about sending things to my desk, let's raise the minimum wage to $15. No one working 40 hours a week. No one working 40 hours a week should live below the poverty line.
Let's stop right there for a moment.
We need to ensure.
These are supposed to be our heroes. If you remember during the campaign, Joe Biden kept saying, heroes, heroes, these are heroes. They shouldn't work. Nobody should live a starvation wage, especially not our heroes. And yet, threw that overboard very quickly. And when Joe Biden added the $15 with the PRO Act, it made it clear to me you don't plan on getting past either. The notion that you're going to invoke the parliamentarian as if it's her fault that you couldn't do it, nonsense. Joe Biden has the power to get rid of the filibuster if he needed to. He has the power to bring Joe Manchin in and get those people on board. He has the power to extemporaneously get out there and speak place after place in order to put these guys in the crosshairs. And considering that Republicans don't seem to be able to attack him in any way that makes marks, that gets across something is wrong with the Republican Party when it can't attack this particular president. Let's one more clip before we go. Go to you guys. Biden wants to remove lead in the water. So what does it mean that there's lead in water all across the United States, that we knew that there was lead in water all across the United States, and that it now takes the president to say, hey, maybe we need to do something about the people drinking, bathing in lead. Does the United States know how many people were adversely affected from an education standpoint? Do they know how many people were adversely affected from a medical standpoint, meaning gray matter damage in the brain and stuff like that? And how long have we known that there was lead all throughout the water in the United States? Let's play this clip, astonishing clip.
It's clean water. And today, up to 10 million homes in America and more than 400,000 schools and child care centers have pipes with lead in them, including drinking water. A clear and present danger to our children's health. American Jobs Plan creates jobs replacing 100% of the nation's lead pipes and service lines, so every American can drink clean water. And the process will create thousands and thousands of good-paying jobs.
Does that have to be sold as a jobs program? Like, you basically told me that 10 million people, homes, 400,000 schools are ensconced in lead. What are the adverse effects of people drinking lead? How long have you known this? And why on earth do you have to sell this as a jobs program as opposed to, hey, let's get rid of the lead? Does this affect crime? Does this affect ability to learn? Does it affect people trying to get jobs later on? Does this affect whether the government has to pay for these people when they get later on because they can't take care of themselves? But Margaret, I'll go to you. What on earth? Like that's a stunning statement, because the implications of that is this has been taking place all across the United States. And I've made the point that when Rahm Emanuel was in Chicago, They did a study and found out this, and they buried that study. This is what, 8 years later?
Well, they buried the video of Laquan McDonald being killed by police. Yes, we've known this for a long time. I mean, it is the reason you need an infrastructure bill. These aging pipes, we know that lead is particularly damaging to young children. But it does say a lot that this has not been made an issue earlier. I mean, I'm glad he is focusing on it, but I think when president says we're finally getting rid of lead in pipes, that is an indication that we have to stop thinking of the country as being advanced, or any of those words we use to describe the country we wish we lived in. So it's a combination of deregulation, mostly from Republicans, and a lack of attention from Democrats. But all of these things, it's a funny thing that he acts like the president has no power to going back to the minimum wage. It's like we need a higher minimum wage, as if he's still on the campaign trail and not the guy who could get this done. It would take a lot of arm twisting, but I'm sure the president has a lot of power. And whenever there's something that they don't feel like doing or their donors don't want them to do, they act like suddenly they're the 90-pound weakling who can't get anything done. It's very annoying to me when he and other presidents do that.
Same.
And act as though we're too stupid to know that he could get almost anything done that he wanted to.
Yeah, it's like, I'm just the president of the United States. I'm powerless. That's all I am.
Yes, I can. I wish we could have that, but gosh darn it, I'm not sure how.
Right, right. Kim, what do you think about it? Like, so from your standpoint, I mean, look, I'm focusing on the lead stuff, and I'm focusing on those, because those are the things that, I mean, there's several parts of the speech that stood out to me, but the lead thing is indicative of, like, how long did you know this? And why is this okay? I mean, this gets even to the Chirac stuff that I like to point to. It's like, if you know that these things are clear problems, how do you let that slide? Meaning, for Joe Biden to say, okay, we're going to pay for education, pre-education. Great. But if those kids are dodging bullets to get to preschool, what does it mean? You know what I mean? Like, there's this speech, I agree with you, it's a good speech. But there are implications that arise from this speech that are problematic and that are not dealt with. What are your thoughts on either of these things?
Well, I mean, we can't expect them in a speech to address the nuances of each and every single one of these issues. Otherwise, the speech would have gone on for much, much longer than it did. And Biden could only really handle 1 hour. I actually was expecting a 2-hour speech. I think that's how long Trump was always going, with 2 hours, but Biden cut it short at an hour. I think it was long enough. So I don't think we can get into the nuances or the nitty gritty on all of these things in a speech like this, but I'm sure behind closed doors, maybe that stuff is being talked about, but I doubt it is, because I don't think much of this is going to be talked about behind closed doors. I actually don't think the president has much power. I think that over the years, the power of the president has really chipped away quite a bit in a variety of ways. I mean, look, in the 70s, the president used to manage the budget, and now that is really Congress that does more of the budget than the president. And so there's, that's why presidents used to campaign constantly on, I'm going to balance the budget, or I'm going to balance the budget. And now they stopped kind of saying that, but they used to still say it even when they didn't really have the power to do it. So I don't think they have a whole lot of power. I think the donors, the money, has all the power when it comes to Washington. And I think the real power of the president is the power that Trump was very good at using. And that was getting the people to support what you want, and getting the power of the people to then go after Congress and say, do it because we demand it. And Joe Biden just, unfortunately, when he talks, when he's talking about things like lead in water, I mean, that should be like the way Margaret said it was much better. Hey, you think we've got an advanced country? We've got lead pipes. We've got lead in the water, and we're poisoning our own children. That should be a sign right there that we're not as advanced as we think. And we need to upgrade America. We need to advance our infrastructure immediately. If he would have spoken more forcefully and aggressively, I think that it would be, again, the trick is with the president is getting the base of the other side on your team, the people. You don't have to get the politicians, but you need to get their voters. You need to get their voters fired up to where their voters are calling them and saying, why aren't you doing this?
Let me ask, do you think that's possible today? Like in our current thing of politics, do you think it's possible for him to get Republican support? Let's say Congress members know. Let's say they're so politically, tone deaf. But what about the members of the public? Is Biden, does Biden have the capability of getting Republican support for this?
Yeah, he can. So. But sorry, go ahead.
Margaret says no.
I think first of all, I don't think it's true that it's only Republicans who oppose some of these things. There's some pretty conservative Democrats too, and they get to hide because they're Democrats. So I think there are Democrats who don't want to raise the minimum wage, for example. But the fact that he doesn't use the bully pulpit, as the term is, to get the public to be more active is an indicator of things that he and other presidents don't really want. If they don't activate the public, and I think they're afraid to, because if they activate the public on one thing, they may demand another. So I think they prefer to take the path of least resistance and shrug their shoulders and say, sorry, can't do that.
What about you, Kim?
Yeah, I mean, I do think that there is a bit of that, but I also just think Biden is not a natural-born leader. And so I just don't think he has the chops to rile people up. We see people that do have that ability. Whether we like the way they rile up the base is, a different question. But we do see quite a few people that are able to do it. You've got like AOC has got that ability. Trump had that ability. Bernie Sanders had that ability. There's quite a few people with that leadership skill when they get up there. I do think that Biden could have gained some Republican support from the voters, the working class voters that are starting to shift towards the Republican Party, the ones that actually supported Bernie Sanders and Donald Trump. I think that Biden could have grabbed them, and especially with a lot of his points last night, a lot of his proposals, had he been more forceful about it. And also if he stay away from language that does seem to, just sort of cater to one side. If you use more general language that is for all Americans, that is more inclusive, and you're firm about it, and you get them fired up, I do think he actually could have gotten some of those working class voting people on both sides of the aisle.
But here's the thing: I don't see Biden stepping out of the boundaries of what you would expect him, or Margaret would expect him, or what we would expect him to do. He's not a Donald Trump, and that's not just because he's not a natural-born leader. It's also because he's been part of the political establishment for almost 50 years. And so, if he were coming back to the lead issue for just a minute, if he were going to criticize America's handling of this, he would have to take some responsibility for that, and that would not encourage optimism for the people listening to his speech. And so it's a weird thing where he's airing the dirty laundry. He's talking about our problems, and he's saying we're going to fix them without addressing how serious the problems are. We've only got a couple minutes left with you folks. I want to move to the issue of race and culture, specifically after Tim Scott, Republican senator from South Carolina, gave a widely publicized speech and attempted rebuttal of a lot of the points that Biden was making. Biden tended to focus on his plans, his policies, the economy, a little bit of healthcare, a lot of education, families, some foreign policy. Anyway, Tim Scott focused a lot of his attention on race and sort of fit this into the culture war conversation. You have a clip from Tim Scott. I want to get your take on this, but first, Andre, let's play this clip from Tim Scott.
Today, kids are being taught that the color of their skin defines them again. And if they look a certain way, they're an oppressor. From colleges to corporations to our culture, people are making money and gaining power by pretending we haven't made any progress at all, by doubling down on the divisions we've worked so hard to heal. You know this stuff is wrong. Hear me clearly. America is not a racist country. It's backwards to fight discrimination with different types of discrimination. And it's wrong to try to use our painful past to dishonestly shut down debates in the present. Today, kids are being taught that the color of their skin defines them again.
Margaret, I'll start it off like this. Who do you think Tim Scott was addressing there? At what point? Because Biden didn't really make a point of race during his address. Who? At what point in time was he addressing Biden? What do you think you said that? What was the point, Margaret?
He was addressing the Republican base. That's who he was addressing, white Republicans. But I don't really care what Tim Scott says, frankly. I can't even, obviously that's untrue. And it's easily provable as being untrue. But he's not important enough for me to get excited. He's a Republican. So, and they trot out a black Republican to because it gives them cover. It gives them cover. It's hard for him to call the racist if they had a white person say it. There would be a firestorm. But I pretty much have, I pick and choose who to use my mental energy on, and Tim Scott just doesn't make it.
I hear you, and yet it's making the rounds. Uncle Tim is trending on Twitter. This has been a big thing. Kim, what's your take?
Well, I think this is kind of one of the problems of having to write the speech, the rebuttal speech, before actually hearing the speech you're going to be countering. Joe Biden didn't really focus much on the culture stuff. Towards the end of his speech, he did, but I actually really like Joe Biden's speech, focusing a lot on jobs and infrastructure and families. But Tim Scott, it just seems like the default for the minority party in power or the minority party that's not in power, it seems like the default is to just focus on race or focus on gender or culture war. It seems like, which too much to my dismay, with the Democratic Party focused all on that rather than economics, and when they were the minority, and now that Republicans say stop focusing on that, and then Republicans are now in the minority and they're the ones focusing on the culture war. I mean, it just seems to be the default to rile up the base, to get the base to believe that there is some cultural boogeyman that is more of a problem to your daily life than the fact you can't pay your bills.
Yeah.
And I call crap on that. That is just crap. You wake up every morning and you stress about paying your bills. You don't worry about whether or not your neighbor thinks some negative thing about you. Who cares what your neighbor thinks about you? Pay your bills if you can. And if you can't, that's your number one stressor.
1,000% agree with you, Kim.
The minority party never wants to focus on that.
Kim, 1,000% agree with you, with one exception. I think in this case, the Republicans just didn't predict this right. Like, I think from the standpoint of the George Floyd stuff, from the killings, from the trials, all of these big name items that have taken place in regards to culture, I think the Republicans just didn't predict this well. Joe Biden came out and gave a speech about economics predominantly. I think he mentioned George Floyd like once, and that might have been 5 minutes of the entirety of the speech. And so, I'm sorry, Margaret, please, comment here. My bad, I didn't hear you.
No, it's okay. Just very quickly, it's also an indicator that they can't really counter anything that Biden said. I mean, they pretty much knew what he was going to say. He was going to talk about his proposals, and nobody's against infrastructure. And he talks about things that most people don't oppose. So they're left with trotting out this tired old stuff. So they throw Tim Scott under the bus, and now he's being called an Uncle Tom.
Uncle Tim.
Shows you they didn't. Yeah, Uncle Tim, Tom, whatever. How convenient that his name is Tim, right? So close to Tom. So they just trot him out for that purpose because they don't really, because Biden's proposals are pretty much centrist.
Yes.
So they couldn't really argue against the substance of what he's announcing. So they had to go back to something that would appeal to only a small segment of their voting bloc.
Well, I saw this and I thought to myself, I thought this is so racist. Now let me explain what I mean by this. I'm saying that tongue in cheek. When I'm watching a movie and the Asian character comes out and he knows karate, I was like, God, man, why are you doing that? I felt like this. That's what I thought this was like, right? You have one Republican that's black, and that's the guy that they use to go to make the speech, as if this guy is unattachable. But the problem is the speech wasn't about race. The speech was about economics. And so if the Republicans are going to hit Biden on this, you need to find a way to hit him on economics, because the public is not going to be against that. What I'm curious about for both of you, and we have about 30 seconds before we close, do you think that the Republican Party, kind of like Eisenhower, needed to change the Republican Party around the ideas of the New Deal, basically saying the New Deal is the way we're going forward. If you don't want it, get out the country, paraphrasing. Do you think the Republican Party on some level changes in order to accommodate what seems to be a specific focus, at least in rhetoric, by Biden on this notion of jobs and investment, etc., in order to just compete with them, meaning they have to move to the left in order to compete. Do you think that happens, or not so much? That doesn't happen. This Republican Party is this Republican Party going forward. What are your thoughts? First, let's go to you, Kim Iverson. Let's go to Kim Iverson first, and then we're going to go to Margaret. But Kim, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, I think that the Republican Party is moving. And I know that's really hard for people to hear that really hate the Republican Party. But if you really pay attention to them, they are moving left. And there's a lot of them that hate it. There's a lot of the establishment, the old guard, Mitch McConnell, that are trying to fight that. But they're not going to be able to fight the voting base. And the voting base is moving economically to the left because the voting base is they're struggling.
Yeah,
and they don't have a choice. So. Yeah, I think they are moving.
What about you, Margaret? What are your thoughts?
I don't think they're moving left so much. They're just waiting this out. You know, they're pretty much out. They have a few Democrats who will vote with them, but now they're just recalibrating. And during this period, they're going to fall back on old, tired tropes. But the Republicans are still the Republicans. But I also just want to add that some of the Democrats are also Republicans. So I think we need to be careful and not think that every Democrat is in favor of these policies.
No. I don't think we don't believe that. I don't think we would ever push that. I think I might disagree with you, though. We need to close this. But when Trump was running and Trump was saying we're going to increase the minimum wage by $10 an hour, Republicans were on board for that. Like from an economic standpoint, like take out the, whether it's races and everything like that. Just put that off the table for the moment. Purely from an economic standpoint, you believe that the Republican Party public is not for these policies on the left, like increase the minimum wage or a jobs plan for the standpoint of investment into infrastructure and stuff like that? Or do you believe they are for it?
But the parties are not, and that's why we have this pro wrestling fake villain, fake hero routine.
Kayfabe. We literally use that. I brought that. Margaret, I'm sorry for cutting, but
what's the word? I have never heard. I've never heard that. What is it called? Kayfabe.
Kayfabe. Kayfabe. Kayfabe. It's exactly what you're talking about. This sort of fake narrative, this fictionalization in pro wrestling, where people are pitted against each other. It's a spectator sport in that sense. Anyway, Margaret, I'm sorry for cutting in, but it was an encore.
I made my point. Thank you.
I love that. I've never heard that. Kayfabe. Right. Let's close it. Guys, I want to thank you guys for coming on. This is our panel. I thought this panel went actually quite well, so maybe we could do these in the future. But the voices that you guys were listening to, Margaret Kimberly, she's a senior columnist and editor for Black Agenda Report and author of Prejudential, Black America and the Presidents. You can follow Margaret on Twitter at Freedom Ride Blog and find her work at blackagendareport.com. We are also joined by Kim Iverson. She's an independent journalist and host of the Kim Iverson Show on YouTube and on Rafkin. You can watch Kim Iverson Show on YouTube at Kim Iverson and follow her on Rafkin at Kim, I believe. I think Shane said it was a prized name on the site. Also on Twitter at Kim Iverson Show. You guys are listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. We will be back for a moment. We'll be taking calls in the wrap.
Fault Lines. Tough questions are the most powerful weapon we have. As long as you have questions, we'll keep asking. Radio Sputnik. Telling the untold. By any means necessary is your guide to the movement and efforts shaping the world around us, from mass incarceration.
No longer am I interested in or concerned with prison reform. I am interested only in the eradication of prisons.
To the battle between police and water protectors.
It was a pretty punishing disregard for the sanctity of human life, that unleashing water cannons on peaceful, prayerful water protectors.
From efforts to protect the environment.
The climate movement is ready to, with plenty of opposition research and force and strength, along with, the right of both science and morality, to fight them on this.
To the movement for Black Lives.
When I first saw the Michael Brown video, when I saw that it clearly contradicted the narrative put forth by the Ferguson Police Department and by police supporters in general, 3 words came to mind. Color me shocked.
Stay tuned to By Any Means Necessary, 5 days a week here on Radio Sputnik. Fault Lines.
And we are back. You're listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. We are now in the wrap segment for today's show. That's right. Even though it's a special edition of the show covering Biden's address to the joint session of the Congress, not his State of the Union, but it effectively fills the same purpose. We are taking your calls. 202-521-1320. Again, that's 202-521-1320. We've got one caller on the line and plenty of room for more. Again, that's 202-521-1320. Let us go to Tarif calling in from New Orleans. Tarif, you are on the line. What's on your mind?
How y'all doing? I want to clarify what I said yesterday, but before I get in that, free Julian Assange. Okay, yesterday I tweeted to Indiam Yusuf Iram about Native Americans, that he's got poverty in the Native American community. Maybe it's good for him to do a story on that. The MOVE organization dealing with Mamiya, also Julian Assange and myself. You never know. You might can find other things besides just contaminated water. It might be bakey, you know, because I really do need help with that to get my story out there. It'd be good for y'all if y'all can invite him back on as well, because that would be a good thing. And also just to tell the public, I'm not no militant just because I want justice for Mamiya. I also want justice for Julian Assange and every other journalist and person that's out there trying to do the right thing. Okay, Biden voted against the Glass-Steagall in 94, 95, 96. He was talking about something dealing with the middle class built the country, but yet when you voted against Glass-Steagall with the rest of the Senate, what happened was it led to the financial crash of 2008, the housing market. All right, with the housing bubble was bust. If he didn't do that, if he didn't vote against it and Glass-Steagall was around, 2008 would have never happened. So you still got this speculation still going on with these houses prices steady going up and people hardly working, can't really find work. Homeless population went up. I watched this thing on YouTube dealing with invisible people, dealing with the homeless problem, growth in explosion in California. They was talking to people that was homeless in California that they was running across people that became homeless after 2008 when they lost their houses because of the financial crash and they lost their funds dealing with the IRA, dealing with the stock market. And also they have another increase in homelessness in California dealing with what happened in 2020, where people can find jobs and they wind up being homeless with their wives and their children and stuff like that. And retirement people, you know, some of the homeless people was, you know, getting Social Security and other things like that. But because the price went up in California, it forced people to become, you know, homeless. So it's not people. So we do have a situation here with that. But back to my case, my case needs to be heard, and also I wasn't downplaying. Look, the Armenian, that's Armenian genocide. The Armenian genocide took place. Yes, the reporters can walk and chew gum at the same time, and they need to talk to the Armenian people. The Turkish reporters need to talk to them. They need to come up with solutions where they can shake on it and work out for better days, because the Armenian people is hurt. Anybody that went through ancestors that went through the trials and tribulations from what happened to the ancestors, you know, that's not good, you know. So the Turkish reporters, Turkish government got to have sit downs with the Armenian people. They come to solutions so they can work out the differences, or it's going to keep on going on and on and on and on. And you know, and y'all need to invite that guy on Yusuf Iram again. If y'all do, I can call in, or maybe I can talk to him too. Yeah, that's all I wanted to say. Free journalism.
We're planning. Tarif, thank you for the call. We're planning on inviting him back on. The first time we had him on, it was a pretty soft conversation. It's the first time we're talking to him. Second time, we were talking about the Armenian genocide, which is of all topics in Turkey a hot button topic. We got into it, but it was good, and it seemed like he enjoyed himself. It seemed like he enjoyed the kind of aggressive back and forth. We did too. We're definitely planning on talking to him about it. Also, Turkey's involvement in Libya, in Syria, and in Iraq. We're planning on talking about all that stuff. And we'll probably revisit that with him as well. But it's fault lines. It's with the nature of the show. We like to, get interesting conversations on the air where each side has a chance to say their say, to, put their words out, get their perspective in. But you try not to let anything that's unreasonable or unsupported go untouched, because that makes for a better conversation. Anyway, agreed on that issue. Jamarl, any take here?
No, the conversation with Yusuf was phenomenal. Look, I don't mind. I think I've said it before. I assume that people are going to have different takes, even if they're being earnest to their own interests. And I'm okay with that. That doesn't bother me in the least. Oftentimes people, especially if they're being of good faith in those different takes, there are areas of agreement that you usually can find where you can at the very least have a conversation and move from. I thought Yusuf was one of those people where you can do that. And so I didn't think he was being grotesquely unfair in regards to his appraisal. I thought he was adding complication in where complication needed to be added. And I thought we were trying to clarify our points. So yeah, agreed. I don't know if the conversation that Tarif is talking about is going to take place anytime soon. I think Armenia is in its feelings right now about losing that war. And I think they're going to probably be in their feelings for a while about losing that war and working that stuff out. Over the long arc of time, maybe. I mean, that's the same thing here, right? So, yeah, every country has their struggles.
It seems like the political, like you said the other day, Nicole Pashinyan's government, which started in protest, is ending in protest. It seems like culturally, politically, one pretty bad state right now. And Turkey, in that sense, has the upper hand, and I don't feel like they feel like they need to make any concessions. It would, as far as I can tell, in the long run, it would only be. I don't see it happening under Erdogan. It would only be if some other leader came to the head of Turkey and decided, okay, it would be strategically beneficial for us to make this move, or if the tables were turned, if more of the world population started to recognize it as a genocide, and if there were serious pressure internationally that came down. And even then, I don't see Erdogan going along with that. It's going to have to be somebody else if and when that happens. We need to close out today's show, though. Interesting show, great show, good special coverage of Biden's address to a joint session of Congress, not his State of the Union. Spirited back and forth with Margaret and with Kim and with Carmine. You're listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. I want to thank you for doing so. We will be back tomorrow, folks, with our last day of the show this week. See you on the other side.
You guys are listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. Another one is in the record books. Really good show. Interesting show. I can't believe I had to fight on education. That just seems so wild to me to have to make that fight. During the show, I was showing you guys the research on that. I don't know why I have to argue about that, but it's pretty clear. Academic research overwhelmingly shows there's a strong correlation between education, work opportunities, and crime. In fact, some studies have documented that increasing college graduation by 5%, simply by 5% in certain communities, say like West Baltimore, can reduce the homicide rate by nearly 20%. There's a direct correlation between crime and education. There's a direct correlation between poverty and education. Those things are intrinsically linked. And look, if you have a situation where crime becomes irrational, then crime is going to go down. Meaning, if you have someone like, in the certain parts of Baltimore, and you have that community where that community is not in disrepute, where jobs are plentiful, where it's easier to go the route of getting a job as opposed to going the route of getting a job that may be in, selling drugs or doing something else that's not necessarily prized. You need, as a society, to make that stuff irrational. I have a house, I have a kid, I have a dog, I have etc. I have a job that I go to. I have more job opportunities beyond this particular job. And if I decide to sell crack, I could lose my house, my car, my job, etc. As opposed to, okay, these job opportunities are not necessarily there. I don't necessarily want to go to this 4-year college when I can't necessarily figure out what I want. I have responsibilities that I need to tend to right now. All right, I'm going to sell this. I'm going to sell that. I'm going to live in this particular dark life. Your society makes choices. And there's some choices that it makes that cuts down on crime, cuts down on poverty. In fact of the matter is, if you cut down on poverty, the crime rate goes down with it. We choose. If you're choosing to keep lead in the water, What are you choosing for that society when you make that choice? And how long have we decided to keep lead in the water? That's a big deal. Those are massive deals. And the speech, it's like, I don't believe that Biden has the ability to get it done. I don't even know if he wants to get it done. I'm inclined to say no. And adding in the $15 minimum wage, a sore spot for me, with the PRO Act, gets across that he doesn't believe in either. Fact of the matter is, if you really want to make changes in our society, if you really want to cut down on crime, if you really want to cut down on poverty, education is one of the ways to do it. So this argument about education just seems ridiculous to me. If we are going to have a fight about it, then we could fight about what types of education. Fair enough. And Carmine, at the very least, gave in on that, saying, look, if this was stuff that was directed to people getting jobs, then he would be more inclined for it. Okay, fair enough. Let's start there. I'm willing to start there, if that's where our meeting of the mind goes. But let's just be clear. The education process and getting an education is positive, whatever its flaws. It is a positive. It is a net, unquestionable positive. I'm going to say like, I'm going to say share, and I am going to say subscribe. Thanks, everyone. I'll see you guys a little bit later today.